Orders of the day. Ordre du jour.
Ordre du jour, ordre émanant du gouvernement, projet de loi du gouvernement.
Government bills, Commons. Resuming at third reading, Bill C-50, an act to amend the Canada Elections Act political financing.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise today and speak. In regards to Bill C-50, I know it's really an important piece of legislation, and I think at the end of the day, I must say I'm a little bit surprised in the sense that the Conservative Party has opted to vote in opposition to the legislation. It really doesn't make too much sense as to why it is that they'd be voting against this legislation. I've listened to them at great length talk and attempt to explain why it is that they're in opposition to the legislation. But I think most Canadians, if they were to read the bill itself, would have to question why it is that the Conservatives have made this decision. And I'm hoping to maybe answer that question, at least in part, as to why I believe the official opposition has decided to vote against it. The New Democratic Party has taken a little bit of a different approach. They're reiterating a lot of points that their Conservative friends are highlighting. I've often made reference to the unholy alliance between the two of them at times, where they like to take work together fairly closely, and you can see that at times with their speaking notes, Mr. Speaker. But they have the wisdom to recognize something in which the Conservatives have not, and that is that the legislation itself is a good piece of legislation and worth supporting. So what is it that we're really asking of the House in this legislation? The essence of the legislation is to say that not only do we want the Prime Minister to be more accountable and transparent in terms of who it is that he is meeting with and who's paying these $250 plate type meeting or gatherings, whatever type of reception that it might be, but that same principle would also apply to the cabinet ministers, and I think this is really where the catch is, the leader of the official opposition and other leaders. This is something that I believe is a very strong positive. It's a step forward when we think in terms of legislation, government legislation, and the types of things that could improve accountability and transparency. So what it really all boils down to, Mr. Speaker, is it says that we want to amend the law so that there is a legal obligation for political entities, for those leaders and the Prime Minister and cabinet ministers, to indicate who it is that is actually showing up at these receptions. And there is, in my opinion, nothing wrong with that. I see that as a strong positive. You know, we've seen many reforms over the last couple of decades to improve the Canada Elections Act and the Finances Act, and I would suggest to you that this is just yet another piece of legislation that is doing just that. So one has to question, well, why on this particular issue are the Conservatives in opposition to it? The only thing that I have discovered is the issue of the current leadership within the Conservative Party seems to believe that Canadians do not have any business in knowing who the official opposition leader is actually meeting with. And it's interesting because last year, we can recall there was a fundraising event. And we knew there was a fundraising event, and the Conservatives actually denied it was with the current leader of the official opposition, the Conservative Party. And when we had made some initial inquiries in regards to it, we were told that that event never occurred. There was no such event. They were actually formally requested whether or not there was an event. And we were told, no, there was no event. Well, that kind of put things at odd with the individuals that actually attended the event. One of those individuals said, no, I did pay. And I believe it was realtors and some business leaders that the leader had actually met with. I don't know the actual price. Is well over 250. I think it might have been 500. Don't quote me on the price, Mr. Speaker, but it was a substantial amount of money in order to be able to meet with the leader. So the leader then finally had to admit, yeah, we did have the fundraiser. And I don't understand the resistance in telling people that they had the fundraiser, Mr. Speaker, but there was a great reluctance. And what I thought was interesting, if you read the one published news story on the issue, that the leader of the official opposition said, well, just wait a minute. I'm not the Prime Minister, in essence. That I don't have to report it. I will keep within the law. And he actually implied that if it was the law, then he would report it. Now, if you kind of connect the dots here, one could draw the conclusion that the Conservatives don't want it to be the law, because that's the reason why they are voting against it. Well, members across the way say that it doesn't, no, it's somewhat silly or possibly ridiculous. But think about it. The leader of the official opposition said, if it was the law, I would actually report it.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
That's what he said. Now we're introducing the law that would have obligated him to report it, and now we have the Conservative Party voting against the law. I don't quite understand why it is or how it is they can justify that the leader of the official opposition, the person that wants to be Prime Minister someday, should not have to share with Canadians who it is that he's meeting with for these big bucks. Instead of trying to explain or justify that, Mr. Speaker, what they're choosing to do is to go and take the line, well, we're voting against this legislation because of so-called cash for access. As if the Conservative Party never did it when they were in government. And some of them heckle across the way, no, we didn't do it. Well, you know, Mr. Speaker, I can recall the annual event of the Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, going to British Columbia, where he has his, summer barbecue, many would call it. And the good news is that if you attended the barbecue, you would be able to watch the Prime Minister walk through into the big white tent. Now, you can't go in the big white tent unless you paid, I believe it was $1,000. But if you paid that $1,000, that gave you 2 minutes with the Prime Minister and a photo, Mr. Speaker. Now, it's not like that was just a one-time event. I understand it was almost like an annual event, and it was very nice of a senator to put on that particular event. But how quickly things have changed. Do they not believe that the Prime Minister Stephen Harper did not raise money for their party, never attended an event where there was money charged? I just gave them an example of it, Mr. Speaker. Now, do you think that Stephen Harper said, here's all the people that were in that white tent? I'll suggest to you no. And if I'm wrong, please tell us who was in the white tent with the Prime Minister, who paid that extra bit of money in order to have the ear of the Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, we know that whether you are a leader or you are a Prime Minister, that leaders of political entities do have a responsibility to assist their respective parties in raising money. Is it too much to ask that the individuals that they meet with, where they're paying over $250, actually at some point become public knowledge? I would suggest to you no. This government has said no, Mr. Speaker. We've actually, the legislation that we're talking about today, the Prime Minister and the Cabinet Ministers have been following now. the point is, they're following it, right? The Conservative Party still doesn't want to follow it. You know, Mr. Speaker, it reminds me of another situation. And my friends will recall this one. And remember, we can all remember, and you know, we just got a chant from the New Democrats, and they're feeling neglected, I guess. So let me bring them in terms of this whole debate that we're having. We'll remember when the Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, was the leader of the Liberal Party, sitting back where the NDP are sitting there today. We all remember those days. And personally, I'm glad those days are over. And the biggest benefactor of those days being over has been Canada's middle class, I must say. But I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, I remember very clearly when leader at the time of the Liberal Party, the third party, stood up in the House and he said, I believe in proactive disclosure and asked for unanimous consent of the House to implement proactive disclosure in regards to members of Parliament. Remember all the objections and the no's, especially coming from the then official opposition, the New Democratic Party. But they weren't alone. They weren't alone at all, Mr. Speaker. The Conservatives also objected to it. And it's not like we just tried it the one time. We tried it on several occasions. So, you know, I believe that the Prime Minister today set into works good deeds that ultimately ensured that there would be more transparency and accountability coming out of this House. And that's what this legislation is going to do. But go back to the proactive disclosure for MPs and what happened? Well, we decided, even though it wasn't the law, and that's what's happening today with our ministers, our cabinet ministers and Prime Minister today, we took actions and we imposed it upon ourselves. It didn't take that long, Mr. Speaker, for the Conservative Party back then to recognize that they were offside, kind of out of touch with Canadians, and I give them credit. They recognized it, and they jumped on board. So it still wasn't the law, but they did comply, Mr. Speaker. Well, my New Democratic friends went kicking and screaming, and it ultimately took an opposition day where they were ultimately shamed into supporting the proactive disclosure. Now, let's come to where we are today. Today we have the New Democrats who learned from that, I would suggest to you, and recognize that this legislation is in fact good legislation, so they are supporting the legislation. And you'll notice, even though they're supporting the legislation, that they're still somewhat critical of the government. But they've recognized the value of good legislation. Now, unlike my Conservative friends across the way, they were brought into believing after the current Prime Minister convinced them that listening to Canadians was a good thing to do. They came on with the proactive disclosure for MPs. But now, Mr. Speaker, on this particular issue, they don't seem to want to listen to Canadians. I always thought that we wouldn't do any worse than Stephen Harper in terms of the leadership. But on this particular issue, they're not recognizing something that Stephen Harper even recognized. And that was that advancing a disclosure or being more transparent and accountable is something that is what Canadians expect. Now, that is why I don't quite understand their positioning on Bill C-50. But it's not too late, Mr. Speaker. That's the good news. It took them a little while to come to their senses on the proactive disclosure for MPs. I'm an optimistic person. I believe the glass is half full. And I would hope that my friends across the way will actually see the merit of passing the legislation. Now, I know some of them have ultimately argued in their presentations, well, we don't need the law to tell us what we should be doing. As one of them says, correct, across the way. One news article, Mr. Speaker, and gee whiz, I wish I had it here. because I'm sure my friends would have been quite impressed by it. And it's due to the fine work in the lobby by Patrick. I had that quote, and I don't have it right now, but let me capture the essence of the quote. And the essence of the quote was from the current leader of the official opposition. And you kind of have to chuckle when you read the quote. And if members want it, I can assure you we can provide you the actual quote. And that's where the current Conservative leader admits that, well, he's a little bit different than the Prime Minister, but it's okay, he will follow the law, and it's just not the law today, so he doesn't have to abide by it. So he feels that he doesn't have to share that information, Mr. Speaker. Well, he said in the article that if it was the law, he would follow it, and he would comply. So the question that I have for the backbench amongst the Conservative Party is, do you believe in accountability and transparency like Liberal members of this House?
That's right.
And if you believe in accountability and transparency and improving the legislation, well, then you should be voting in favor of this bill. Now, as some members kind of laugh about that fact, you know, they like to talk a lot about the commissioner lately, the Conflict of Interest Commissioner. Do you know what the Conflict of Interest Commissioner has to say about the legislation in essence? It's good legislation. It moves us forward. I would suggest that if my Conservative friends were to actually do a little bit of canvassing on this particular issue, that they would find that Canadians as a whole would support this type of legislation. Because it is time that we have it. And I applaud the Minister of Democratic Reform for taking the initiative in a relatively short time span and bringing forward legislation that I believe will, in fact, ensure more accountability and more transparency. Because these are the things that are important for us to see put into place as we continue to evolve with our election laws and the way in which we finance campaigns. For me personally, Madam Speaker, some of the reforms that we have, or Mr. Speaker, sorry, some of the reforms that we have seen over the years, in particular, getting rid of the corporations and union contributions, going to the individual, has been a very strong positive. I think that it's changed the way that many Canadians look at politicians. We don't have that perception of being bought by groups, interest groups. In fact, I believe in one of my earlier comments, I talked about finances and how important finances is, and there's no question about it. You know, democracy, we got, I would argue, the best democracy in the world right here in Canada. There's always room for improvements, and that's why I'm glad to see this particular piece of legislation. But I can tell you, on the financial, I think that we're, in essence, lead the way in many ways in the world. At the end of the day, you know, we will probably spend, and I'm not too sure of the actual dollar amount, Mr. Speaker, but I think it's somewhere around $80,000 to $100,000 in one candidate will spend in Winnipeg North, and we'll have 4 or 5 candidates. Where they get that money from, and how important it is that we get the money necessary in order to be able to have a full campaign. But the reason why I raise that, Mr. Speaker, is the note that I would like to kind of, from a personal perspective, leave it on, is not to overestimate the importance of money, but rather to emphasize how important our volunteers are. I can receive a donation, for example, of up to $1,500. But I can tell you the real value of some of those volunteers far exceeds the value of a $1,500 donation. I don't believe we give enough credit for volunteers of all political stripes, whether you're Green, Liberal, New Democrat, Conservative, the efforts that our volunteers put into our campaigns, both at the local level and the national level, I think are vastly underestimated. And from my perspective, and I know from my colleagues, in fact, all members of the House, that I would like to express my appreciation to those individuals. They deserve just as much credit as anyone that would give any sort of a cash donation. Having said that, donations are always appreciated too. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. Question commentaire. The honourable member for Peace River, Westlock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. It's great on a Friday morning to get me all fired up like that, so I really appreciate it. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that he talked about was the needs for this particular law, and that brings clarity and things like that. What's interesting about that is that there's something called like the spirit of the law, and then there's like the words of the law. And when we on the conservative side, we understand the spirit of making sure that campaign financing, making sure that financing that is brought into campaigns isn't tied to a particular decision. Now, when we're in opposition, and many of the backbench MPs in the Liberal Party, but also the NDP Party being in opposition as well, we do not have any decision-making abilities in this place. We have the ability to vote on particular issues, but when you are in cabinet, when you are the Prime Minister, you make significant decisions every day that don't necessarily need the scrutiny or meet the scrutiny of this particular place. That is where we really need to ensure that the financing is not being drawn in to influence a particular decision. We understand that on the Conservative side. Apparently, the Liberals need a law to lay that out for them. Will the member not recognize that there is a spirit and intent that we all understand?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do believe that the members, whether this particular individual member or others, underestimate just how influential the leader of an official opposition really is. And I would underline that the leader of the official opposition hopes someday to become the Prime Minister. And to say that there is no interest in knowing who the leader is meeting with at these big dollar events, I believe is just wrong. I believe that at the end of the day that Canadians do have a right to know. It could formulate many of the questions that are posed by opposition and the way in which they might deal with specific issues. I'm very much aware of the influence that the leader has in opposition, and I've seen that, especially when Stephen Harper, that whole glass bubble thing. I think that the member is not really recognizing the type of importance that leaders of all political parties play in our democratic process. And to try to say that Canadians do not need to know who their financial backers are, I think is wrong. I really believe that leaders of political parties do have a responsibility, and that's what this legislation is doing, putting that into law.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Vancouver, Kingsway.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it would do well to remember why we're having this debate. I think all Canadians will remember after this last election in 2015 the tawdry spectacle of the Prime Minister and Liberal cabinet ministers having events held for them in corporate boardrooms and law firms where people were paying $1,500 to come get special access to the Prime Minister and to cabinet ministers. That's why we're here today. Now, this is the Liberals' tepid and weak response to that situation. You could drive a truck through the loopholes in this bill. Basically, it doesn't change cash for access. It enshrines cash for access. So now what you have to do is just advertise the cash for access event in advance. And here's a loophole. It only applies to events where more than $200 is required to attend. just charge $199 to attend, and then you can hit them up for $1,000 once they're there, and you don't have to publish any names of anybody who's there. At one time, the Liberal government of Jean Chrétien, basically after the SponsorGate scandal, where they were shoveling millions of dollars of government taxpayers' dollars to the Friends and Liberal Party, had to bring in electoral finance rules. And I think those were good. That's where they banned union donations, corporate donations. At that time, they also boldly allowed public financing of elections with the per-vote subsidy. The Harper government got rid of that. So I'm asking my honourable colleague, why doesn't he take a bold step and get rid of the private financing problem here at all, so we get rid of this tawdry spectacle of politicians having to beg people for money, and bring back the per-vote subsidy that at one time the Liberals brought in? Why won't the current government have the bold...
Sorry, we are getting on with time. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I indicated earlier, I do appreciate the support that the New Democrats are giving to the legislation. So even though the member across the way just criticized and virtually said the legislation wasn't all that good, I do recognize that they are voting in favor of it. I suspect the reason why they're voting in favor of it, Mr. Speaker, is because, much like proactive disclosure, they understand that this is the type of legislation that Canadians would, in fact, get behind and expect all members of parliaments from all political entities to support it. Because as democracy continues to evolve, I believe having it enshrined in law so that ministers, Prime Minister, the leader of the New Democrats or the leader of the official opposition all have a responsibility to ensure that it goes public in terms of who it is that they're meeting with when these individuals are paying in excess of $200 in order to be able to go to a reception or have a dinner with any one of those individuals.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Ottawa West Nepean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my honourable colleague for his eloquent speech on this. And the fact is, I'm glad he mentioned Stephen Harper, former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, who to this day has never actually revealed the top 10 donors to his first leadership campaign in 2002, and that was before Liberals brought in the most significant political party financing legislation ever, the first time that corporations and unions couldn't donate, the first time that there were spending limits, the first time that there were transparency requirements, and in fact that was opposed by the former Conservative Party as well. And former Prime Minister Stephen Harper with the National Citizens Coalition actually took the Government of Canada to court to strike down the rules that didn't allow lobbyists and other third-party groups to spend as much as they wanted to influence an election. And now we have the official opposition opposing even this legislation. So could the my colleague, please let us know which party it is that has always brought the most significant changes for transparency and accountability on political party financing.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague and friend for a great question. And what it does is it does highlight a difference between the Conservatives and the Liberals inside the House. The Conservatives tend to want to resist any sort of change where there's more accountability and transparency in regards to election financing laws. Because historically what you will see is that you will have, whether it's Jean Chrétien or our current Prime Minister, wanting to put into place what we believe is positive legislation that ensures more accountability and transparency. My colleague made reference to the former Prime Minister, Stephen Harper. I can recall, there was a great deal of money that was raised. The top 10 contributors, we never ever did find out. I would ultimately argue that opposition leaders, leaders of political entities, do have a responsibility to be accountable and more transparent with Canadians. This will do that along with incorporating the Prime Minister and Cabinet Ministers.
And I think we've got time for one more question and response. The Honourable Member for Edmonton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I feel like I'm like Bill Murray in Groundhog Day, except every day waking up in Pennsylvania, I wake up and it's a member from Winnipeg North speaking. Now, one of the issues, one of my favorite of all the Cash for Access, the 100 that this government did, was one that got nicknamed the Hash for Access, where people paid registered lobbyists for the marijuana industry were allowed in to personally lobby the parliamentary secretary for justice who's in charge of the marijuana legalization. They actually bragged the $150 they paid to him was well worth it because they could not get in to see him on his free time. This legislation does nothing to bar such events happening again in the future, either because of the $200 or the fact parliamentary secretaries can be lobbied. How can the member sit and say that this is a decent bill that'll help clear up some of these cash for access scandals that the Liberals seem to live on?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, you know, it's interesting that my colleague and friend would say that. He somewhat gives the impression maybe if it included PSs, then the Conservatives would be voting in favour of the legislation, and I don't know if that is in fact the case. I think that what we need to recognize is that every opportunity this government has had to be able to ensure more transparency and accountability, that the government has taken actions in that direction. And today what we're doing is we're debating a piece of legislation that deals with the Prime Minister of Canada, cabinet ministers, and leaders of political parties. I suspect into the future we'll continue to look at ways in which we can ensure even more accountability and transparency that would would possibly go beyond that, maybe even include all members of Parliament.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Carleton.
The government is proposing to further regulate political fundraisers by requiring leaders and ministers file a bunch of reports every time they hold one. Now, to be clear, the names of donors and the amounts they give are already published. This bill would simply require more reports on where and when these donors attend gatherings. Now, before we judge the merits of the proposal, let's go back to first principles and ask, why do restrictions on political fundraising exist at all? There is only one reason we restrict those donations, and it is to prevent people from turning money into power. Political power is zero-sum. There's only so much of it to go around. If a donor gets more, everyone else has less. But why would donors be willing to pay for political power in the first place? The answer is return on investment. Large-scale donors almost invariably want something in return for the money they invest in politics. Usually, they want a grant, an interest-free loan, a contract, or a regulation or protective tariff to stop their competitors. They believe that the donation will help them get this government assistance, and they calculate that the advantage gained is vastly bigger than the donation necessary to get it. As an example, just yesterday we learned that the largest corporate donor to the Ontario Liberal Party gave the party $480,000, in exchange for which it got $160 million in government handouts. What a return on investment. This company got 300 times what it paid the party, smashing all stock market investing records set by Warren Buffett and John Pierpont Morgan. Moneyed interests who donate are not giving, therefore, at least in many cases. They are not giving, they are buying. They expect something in return. Will a bill that requires the publication of events that they attend, events for which their donations are already recorded and made public, prevent that from happening? Now, of course not. We're seeing that right now. Moneyed interests are finding other ways than just donations to purchase influence. Paid lobbyists, massive third-party advertising campaigns, of which there were tens of millions of dollars invested in helping this government get elected through unregulated third-party advertising in the last election. Gifts to the Prime Minister in the form of paid vacations or exorbitant speaking fees by organizations that had vested interests on how the then leader of the Liberal Third Party would vote in the House of Commons. So, if these restrictions on donations have not thus far been successful at getting money out of politics, at stopping people from converting their dollars into power, then how can we put an end to this tawdry practice? The answer is we need to get government out of the economy. Government has become such a dominant part of the economy that those that wish to make money need the favor of government decision makers to do it. So they invest in political influence to get that favor. Nobel Prize-winning economist James Buchanan called it public choice theory. He wrote, however, when the governmental machinery directly uses almost 1/3 of national product, when interest groups clearly recognize the profits to be made through political action, and when a substantial proportion of all legislation exerts measurably differential effects on the separate groups of the population, an economic theory can be of great help in pointing towards some of the means through which these conflicting interests may ultimately be recognized, end quote. His public choice theory has been described as political theory without the romance. According to William Shugart, public choice theory transfers the rational actor model of economic theory into the realm of politics, where people act rationally in a market economy, investing in order to get a return. Dr. Buchanan found that government-run economies have the exact same kind of calculated trade-offs, people investing in politics in order to get rich. Socialists often decry corporate profiteers who make money in the private sector. As a solution, they believe in replacing the private sector with ever bigger government. But when government replaces private business, what happens to these profiteers? Do these rapacious capitalist vultures transform into selfless doves? When socialism replaces the free market, does it simultaneously remove all greed from human DNA? Do people stop wanting to make money? Of course not. In fact, the only thing that changes is the way you make money. The way you make money in a government economy is by winning the favor of the political decision makers who allocate the resources. Instead of selling things that people agree to buy, you buy the politicians who control the money. If all the money is in the great vault of the state, profiteers work at buying or renting the keys to that vault. They donate to politicians who give them subsidies. They offer luxurious vacations to prime ministers in exchange for grants to their foundations. They hire lobbyists to convince governments to shut down their competitors with more regulation and tariffs. As Buchanan wrote, the individual who seeks short-term pleasure through consumption of modern luxury items sold in the market is precisely the same individual who will seek partisan advantage through political action. In the book Welfare for the Well-to-Do, economist Gordon Tullock put it this way: today, the individual who works hard and thinks carefully in order to make money in the market will also work hard and think carefully in order to use the government to increase his wealth. Thus, we should anticipate that effort and ingenuity would be put into using the government for gain. And if we look at the real world, we do indeed see such activities. And so, Mr. Speaker, the larger government becomes, the more we can expect profit seekers to turn their money into power and to turn that money back into yet more money. We see the evidence. In 2014, the last full year of the Conservative government, when government spending was on the decline, lobbyists registered 13,000 interactions with designated public office holders. Last year, there were 23,000 lobbyist interactions with designated public office holders, a 79% increase in just 3 years. Why is it that businesses are spending, and unions and others are spending so much more on lobbyists? Well, the answer is because there's so much more money in the government to be had. Businesses which seem to return on investment believe they invest in a lobbyist, they can get more of that government money. The two fastest growing sectors in our economy now are government and lobbyists, the two sectors that grow hand in hand. And there has been a payoff. Bombardier invested in lobbyists and got $400 million in interest-free loans from the government. Private equity funds and investment bankers have invested in lobbyists and secured a $15 billion infrastructure bank to protect their investments in mega projects. Some tech companies have invested in lobbyists, and they have been able to secure a brand new billion-dollar corporate welfare fund that will create so-called superclusters. Money, of course, will go to the best lobbied for firms. Big governments lead to more lobbying elsewhere as well. Strategas Research Partners produced a graph showing the correlation between U.S. government spending as a share of GDP and the amount corporations spend on lobbying in Washington. In the year 2000, federal spending in the U.S. was about 19% of GDP, and there was about $2 billion of lobbying. By 2009, government spending had grown to 25% of GDP, and real lobbying had nearly doubled in inflation-adjusted terms to $4 billion. More money in the government in Washington, more money spent on lobbyists to get that money in Washington. When government decides who gets what, business buys a larger share of government. And who wins when that happens? Well, of course, those with money. They can hire the lobbyists, promise future jobs to politicians, make donations, schmooze the right officials. The working class, by contrast, can afford to do none of these things. They are too busy trying to keep their heads above water, raise their children, and pay their bills in order to have the means to accumulate and leverage political influence. Big government brings economic oligarchy. It concentrates wealth in the state and in the hands of those most able to control the state, a privileged class of modern-day aristocrats. So if we want moneyed interests to stop pouring money into politics, we must remove the economic power of politicians to reward them for doing so. And that is done by reinstating the free market. A free market where business makes money by pleasing customers, rather than a government-run economy where business makes money pleasing politicians. A free market economy where you get ahead by having the best product, rather than a government-run economy where you get ahead by having the best lobbyist. A free market economy where people put their minds to work investing in products and services that people would voluntarily buy with their own money, rather than putting our best minds to work to win over the favor of powerful politicians with keys to the vault of the state. A free market economy based on meritocracy, not a government-run economy based on aristocracy. So if the government really wants to put an end to the excesses of money in politics, it must have the humility to surrender control of large parts of the economy over which it has no business being involved. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. Question commentaire. The honourable member for Glengarry Prescott Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my honourable colleague for his speech. I can assure him that probably a few doors down at the Manning Convention, they would have loved to hear that speech as well. But to get back to the heart of the reason why we're doing this, it's to bring transparency to election financing. And we've heard the Conservatives time and time again over this week that we shouldn't have to relay to the law to provide us with moral values. And yet we find that we're cooperating with the spirit of the law, even though it's still not the law. And we're wondering when exactly is the Conservative Party going to get in line and finally publish the names of those who attend their fundraisers.
Honourable member for Carleton.
Well, we already do publish the names of all people who attend our fundraisers. That has happened since 2006. When the previous Conservative government introduced the Accountability Act requiring full transparency in donations. It was when the Conservative Party banned corporate union donations and required such public reporting that those rules came into place. The problem is, no matter how many rules we create, the Liberals and other big government parties continue to find ways around them. If you ban corporate donations and union donations, well, they just set up third-party groups to spend tens of millions of dollars to elect Liberals, as happened in the last election. If you ban direct gifts to a party, well, or to a politician, this Prime Minister, well, he calls it a speaking fee, and those interest groups that want to have his ear and can control his direction, they pay him money, exorbitant sums of money that no one would realistically pay to hear him speak. When you restrict the ability to donate to a political party, influential players simply exert influence on this Prime Minister by taking him on luxurious vacations that are worth tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. So there are always going to be ways that moneyed interests exert their power over government. What I am proposing in my speech is that we ought to reduce the power of government so that those moneyed interests devote themselves to pleasing customers and not politicians.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Courtenay Alberni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank my friend and colleague from Carleton for his speech. During the 2015 electoral campaign, the Prime Minister said, quote, "There should be no preferential access to government or appearance of preferential access accorded to individuals or organizations because they have made financial contributions to politicians and political parties," end quote. This is the rule the current Prime Minister set out for himself and for his cabinet, that there should be no preferential access to government or even the appearance of preferential access based on donations. But this bill would do nothing to affect that, only that the names that donate to political parties are published, and that this bill would change the timing of the publication of those names. Therefore, pay-to-play continues, cash for access continues. This is just going to speed up when we tell people about how the government was bought and sold, and that we are going to inform the public online quicker as to how preferential access was given. So can my colleague explain how Bill C-50 would do anything to help implement the Prime Minister's own promise to Canadians that no preferential access to government or appearance of preferential access would be given based on financial contributions?
Honourable member for Carleton.
Well, it would do nothing. It would require politicians file another report to reveal information that's already necessarily revealed. Donors are already public. But there are multiple ways people give donations. The Aga Khan gave tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of donations to the personal well-being and luxury of the Prime Minister, while he was simultaneously seeking a $15 million grant for his foundation. A decision maker in government receiving that kind of luxury benefit in other jurisdictions have led to resignations, police investigations, and even charges. And I can, with time, Mr. Speaker, give you many examples of politicians around the world whose careers have been ended by doing much less. But the point I'm making here is that this is a government that has rendered itself open and susceptible to all kinds of gift receiving and favoritism from those who are seeking something from the government. The fact that we have a sitting Prime Minister who would think it appropriate to receive tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of free luxury from someone who had personally asked him for $15 million worth of government money is an astonishing fact indeed.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire. The honourable member for Peace River Westlock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for his great speech. Absolutely. One of the things that he mentioned in the speech was the arrogance of the government to think that they can control every aspect of the economy. I was wondering if you could just elaborate on that point a little bit more. Thank you.
Honourable member for Carleton.
One of the falsehoods, one of the false allegations leveled at parties on the left is that they're against people getting rich. In fact, they're not against people getting rich. They work very hard to make themselves very rich. We have a millionaire Prime Minister and a gazillionaire finance minister. They're not against rich people. They just have a different idea of how people get rich. They believe that people should get rich off the government through corporate subsidies, through complicated loan guarantee schemes, through inflated electrical contracts for so-called green wind and solar energy, etc. These policies have made a small number of people spectacularly rich. But when you're getting rich off the government, you're getting rich by making everyone else poorer. In a free market economy, you can only get ahead by selling people that things they actually want to buy with their own money. They're by definition better off, or they would not be spending their own money to buy it. when a teenage high school student who makes his money mowing the lawns goes into an Apple store to buy an iPad, he may have a net worth of $1,000. He's negotiating with a nearly $1 trillion enterprise, yet in that one moment, that high school student has just as much power as the biggest company the world has ever known, because they can't get his money unless they give him something that's worth more to him than he has to part to get it. That is the genius of the free market. Everybody must necessarily win in every single transaction for it to occur. If the government wants to democratize our economy, it will reinstate the free market system and put an end to the excessive controls of government and the elites that they've instilled since they took office.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire? L'honorable député de...
The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank my colleague and ask the following question. The Liberals seem to want to be more transparent and demonstrate that they're a bit more ethical and moral. In this bill, they say we'll set up a $1,000 fine when we know that all of the receptions for wealthy Liberals friends, people give much more than $1,000, $1,500. Well, the fine still allows Liberals to make money. Furthermore, in this bill, there's no powers investigation to the Director General of Elections when that power was requested. There's very little opportunity to really shed light on the problems that we would find, namely ethical ones. I'm wondering what my colleague thinks of that, the Honourable Member for Carleton. We already have a very strict system when it comes to donations to political parties and to candidates. I don't think that we need more power for civil servants, for bureaucrats at Elections Canada. They already have a lot of power, that is certain. The problem that we have with the mix of money and power in politics is that we have a government that has grown to the point where it controls who receives what. In this context, it seems normal. We can see that interest groups would invest in political power in order to increase their personal wealth. If we wish to reduce the amount of money in politics, we need to reduce the involvement of the state in the economy. Before I recognize the Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi, for the rest of the debate, I must inform her that I will have to interrupt her after approximately 3 minutes in order to proceed with member statements. Resuming debate. The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Thank you very much. We are talking about Bill C-50, again put forward by the Liberals. It is no coincidence that we're discussing this today. Many scandals have shed light on the scandalous activities, on the dubious fundraising activities held by the Liberals. And it's to improve their image that they are tabling Bill C-50. A year later, a year after having broken their promise on electoral reform, which was proposed during the 2015 campaign, before, during, and after the campaign, they're proposing this bill to cover up the fact that they broke their promises. They promised this to a whole generation of young people, including mine, to say, oh no, it's fine, it's true that our electoral system isn't very representative. It doesn't necessarily represent the vote of citizens. And finally, people believed in it. We believed in it here at the NDP. In the end, I think we were too naive. We told ourselves that this was constructive. There were hundreds of thousands of Canadians who testified, who were consulted, when the committee traveled throughout the entire country in order to collect the ideas and proposals of citizens. 80% of citizens said that they were in favor of a system that had a proportional component. Almost 90% of experts who testified before the Electoral Reform Committee, indicated that they were in favor of some type of proportional representation system for the next elections. And when the Prime Minister says on the CBC that he was not persuaded and that a year ago, when he put an end to this potential electoral reform process, everyone was dumbfounded. What more do you need than 80% of citizens and 90% of experts who all seem to be agreeing on the same idea? This means that people stop believing in their politicians. We gave them a mandate of representing public opinion among citizens. And the Prime Minister himself is the one who said over 60 times that he was going to make sure that 2015 would be the last one held under the first-past-the-post system. And then he just cast that aside and said, well, the current system seems to be favoring me, and I will keep it in spite of everything that we did. And it cost a great deal of money. This committee traveling all over the country, all that for nothing. In the end, he decided for himself and decided that all of these consultations, all of the experts, all Canadians were worth nothing. The honourable member for Salaberry-sur-Roi will have 16 and a half minutes remaining when the House resumes debate of this motion. Statements by members. The honourable member for La Pointe-de-l'Île.
Mr. Speaker, the Olympic Games of Pyeongchang opened today. The Olympic spirit aims at creating healthy competition among athletes from all nations across the world. At the last Olympic Games in Sochi, Quebec athletes won 36% of medals for Canada, putting Quebec in 11th place of medal winners, ahead of more than 70 other nations. Something to be truly proud of. Since Canada recognizes Quebec as a nation, Quebec should be able to have its own national teams, just as other sovereign nations do. Those who participate in the more than 206 nations accredited by the International Olympic Committee. The Bloc Québécois wants to wish great success to all Quebec athletes, all Canadian athletes, and all nations' athletes. Long live Quebec and its athletes. The Honourable Member for Laurentides-Labelle. Mr. Speaker, recently I had the pleasure of celebrating the joining up of the Quebec part of the Trans-Canada Trail. The trail runs through my riding of Laurentides-Labelle and is a source of pride. Thanks to the Canadian government's assistance in maintaining and improving this essential infrastructure, thousands of residents and visitors can take advantage of direct access to the longest trail in the world. Le Petit Train du Nord and the extraordinary landscapes in our region are really something. Today it is used by hikers, cyclists, cross-country skiers, skidoo enthusiasts, and this explains why Laurentides-Labelle is such a wonderful riding, shines in Quebec, Canada, and the world. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, university students are concerned over this Prime Minister's assumption that he has his finger on the heartbeat of what Canadians value. Angered that he demands they forego their charter rights and place his values ahead of their own or lose the opportunity to receive 2018 Canada Summer Jobs funding. One university student contacted me to say that she is very disappointed in this government choosing them for their own political agenda. She is capable of determining her personal values and where she wants to work without government interference. More than any one ideology, Canadians value our democracy democracy, where freedom of religion and individual thought are protected by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms from the overreach of this Liberal government or any government in power. This domestic social engineering tactic harms what makes Canada the most sought-after country to call home by reducing diversity, stifling free speech, and affirming the false accusation that if you don't agree with me, you hate me. This partisan values test must be removed. Canadians know what we value. It's our individual freedoms.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member for Fleetwood Port Hills.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to note the loss of a notable person in our Fleetwood community, Gord Anderson, who lost a tough fight with cancer on December 22nd. Gord had only recently become president of the Fleetwood Community Association, but that was after 30 years of teamwork with the late Rick Hart and the passion they had to mold Fleetwood into Surrey's preeminent town centre. Together, Gord and Rick were a formidable team, and the creation of Francis Park, a vibrant centre of our community, is a testament to their achievements. Gord's passion for the community started with his kids' sports, and it was the catalyst that turned his success as a developer into a drive to make a difference. Gord's roots and attachment in the community run deep, and we share his loss with his family, but we also celebrate his family's ongoing commitment to service. So please join me in a salute to Gord and to his daughter, Brianna Berman, who's taken up her dad's legacy and vision as the new president of the Fleetwood Community Association.
Honourable member for Courtenay Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, last week Vancouver Islanders said goodbye to one of our best, Bob Purdy, also known as the Paddler. Bob dedicated his life to promoting active living and environmental awareness through his nonprofit organization, Paddle for the Planet, and was the architect behind World Paddle for the Planet Day. Some of his feats to raise awareness were truly amazing, including paddling the full 135-kilometer length of Okanagan Lake in 2012 and his over 2,100 consecutive days of paddling from 2011 to 2017. Along with the Canadian Coast Guard, the good people of Tofino said goodbye to Bob, with a proper waterman send-off and a rally to support his wife at Mackenzie Beach. I encourage everyone to share #GoBecauseYouCan and to seek out the award-winning documentary, The Paddler, which beautifully showcases what Bob stood for and how he inspired those around him. From the bottom of my heart, thank you, Bob. Your legacy will continue to change the world one paddle at a time.
The honourable member for Etobicoke Lakeshore.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honour one of Canada's leading law firms as it celebrates its centenary. Founded in 1918 by Frank Hughes and Jack Agar, and joined by Jack Amos in 1930, Hughes Amos has grown to become a leading litigation firm in Canada. Right from the beginning, Hughes Amos lawyers have been making their mark. Frank Hughes was the first practicing lawyer in Canada to be appointed directly to the Supreme Court of Canada. Since that time, over a dozen Hughes Amos lawyers have been appointed as judges to the bench at all levels. Today, 37 lawyers serve in Hughes Amos Toronto and Hamilton offices, and I'm proud to point out that over half of the team is made up of highly successful women. I'm also deeply proud that I have been affiliated with this firm for over 24 years. Hughes Amos is a well-respected firm in the industry. Best Lawyers, one of the most valued and respected peer review publications, lists several Hughes Amos lawyers as tops in their field. Congratulations to Hughes Amos on this momentous occasion, and here's to another 100 years.
Honourable member for Edmonton West.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor a local hero from Edmonton, Mr. Raymond Persilo, who I had an honor to meet on Holocaust Memorial Day. In 1941, Raymond sacrificed his freedom to help his brother escape from the Gestapo. He was sent to Auschwitz concentration camp, where he was known as prisoner 12623. After 4 years, he became one of the longest surviving prisoners in Auschwitz and Birkenau. Freed by U.S. troops on the Buchenwald Death March, he was down to just 90 pounds. He came to Alberta with his wife in 1949 and started his long service to his community. His contributions and his honors received are numerous, including the Pro Memoria Medal from the Republic of Poland and the Queen's Diamond Jubilee. Despite all the horrors he endured, he harbors no hatred in his heart, and he told me that he is in fact a lucky man who never lost his faith in God. He serves as a lesson to what it means to live honorably and to find strength in the darkest of places. Mr. Persilo, thank you for your service in Alberta and for showing where there is faith, there is hope. Thank you.
The honourable member for Pontiac.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, this week, along with the Quebec Forestry Minister, Luc Blanchet, I had the opportunity to take part in Paper Week 2018.
Pontiac and Gatineau valleys, covering our landscape and interrupted only by farmers' fields and logging towns such as Maniwaki, Fort Coulonge, Bois-Franc, L'Eau, Partage du Fort, and so many others. With government support, Canada's forest bioeconomy is evolving new industries, investing in research, developing products and markets, and creating economic opportunities for Indigenous and rural communities. Today, Mr. Speaker, trees are transformed into bioplastics, jet fuel, food additives, proving just how innovative the forest sector can be.
I'm proud of our forestry heritage, which has helped build our country and the Pontiac, an industry which is constantly reinventing itself and innovating in order to continue to thrive.
Prescott Russell.
Swoosh to the left, swoosh to the right. Canada's going to fight, fight, fight. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to wish Canadian Olympians from my riding the best of luck at the 2018 Winter Olympic Games in Pyeongchang. Bonne chance à Valérie Grenier, Geneviève Lacasse.
Good luck to Valérie Grenier, Geneviève Lacasse, and others. Canadians will watch our athletes compete with teams from all over the world. They will wear and fight for the maple leaf, and I'd like to thank the parents, communities, coaches who have supported our athletes. All those who worked so hard to make sure that our people can compete. This is an occasion for all countries to get together to celebrate competition, friendship, and fairness. Valérie, Geneviève, Vincent, we're so proud of you.
The honourable member for North Okanagan, Shuswap.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Trade seems to be a real challenge for this Prime Minister. First, it was softwood lumber trade. In 2016, we were promised a framework within 100 days. Now, nearly 2 years later, the PM's framework is nothing more than broken toothpicks. Then there was NAFTA, where he conceded to a rewrite even before being asked. Who knows what he was trading in the Caribbean vacation, and what did we get in return? A $200,000 tab paid by Canadian taxpayers. Not such a great deal. Now there's a trade war breaking out between two friendly provinces in the West, and this Prime Minister fails to act like a national leader in the national interest. Instead, he flies to California to celebrate sunny days while we learn that 88,000 jobs, Canadian jobs, were lost in January. There is a trade trend with this Prime Minister, and it is not a good one. Can we finally trade this Prime Minister off before he delivers another trade disaster?
Honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize a community in my riding that has been dealt some difficult blows of late. But I want to acknowledge their amazing spirit in the face of adversity. When the village of Orono learned, through no fault of their own, that they may be losing some key services, for example, their only bank and their LCBO, they came together as a community just 2 nights ago. Over 100 members of this tight-knit community gathered not to blame, not to complain, but to come up with solutions in an encouraging show of collective spirit. They realize that they want to move the village forward by looking to the future rather than the past. They formed an action committee to help shape a dynamic plan going forward. Rural communities like Orono face particular difficulties, but it's so inspiring when community members come together to chart their own destinies. I applaud their efforts, and I look forward to supporting the village of Orono in their actions moving forward. Thank you.
The honourable member for St. John, Rothsay.
Mr. Speaker, one of the most effective ways to combat the intergenerational cycle of poverty is through significant investments in early learning and childcare. It is something I've advocated for when I ran for office and something I continue to fight for every day in my riding and here in Ottawa. I'm proud to have contributed to HUMA's report on poverty reduction, Breaking the Cycle, which recommended substantial investments in early learning. I was also thrilled to stand beside Premier Brian Gallant when he announced the $30 million bilateral childcare and early learning agreement between our government and the province of New Brunswick this past summer. This substantial investment in early learning and childcare will be transformative for families in my riding who are struggling to make ends meet and give their children better futures. I'm proud to stand with my government and that of Premier Gallant to deliver meaningful programs that will change and save lives in St. John Rothesay and across the country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as a member of Parliament, I recognize the importance of the awareness of homelessness. It's not always visible, but it happens every day. Mr. Speaker, next week I will be joining Tim Smart, Mike Kirkfleet, Sean Dyke, Joe Preston, and to raise awareness for the Elgin St. Thomas United Way by spending a night sleeping in my car. It's going to be a long, cold night, but I know that one night in my car does not compare to what some have to experience each and every day. The name of the event is Sleepless in Our City, and I'm very proud to be part of it. Having a roof over our head is a foundation for every person. Most of us are lucky, but many are so unfortunate. Hearing the stories of these people and trying to understand what they go through is difficult but necessary. Remember the next time you pass someone on the sidewalk that they may not indeed have a place to call home. Let's work together as Canadians to ensure that every single person has a roof over their heads and create a foundational approach so no one has to go sleepless in the city. Thank you.
The honourable member for Longueuil Charlebourne. Mr. Speaker, every year, thanks to the Valentine's for Veterans program, thousands of St. Valentine cards are handmade by young Canadians.
Of the Greenfield Park Lions Club and the artistic talents of the students of Greenfield Park Primary International School, over 60 veterans in Longueuil-Charlebourne will be receiving beautifully handmade cards for Valentine's Day this year. J'ai eu la chance.
I was able to read some of the cards addressed to our veterans. One, for example, from Gabriella, who wrote, "For someone special who made our world better. May you always be loved, commemorated, and cherished."
I sincerely thank you for your dedication to our country. Your sacrifice in the face of great danger and the bravery that you showed will echo in the generations to come. Mr. Speaker, I am so proud of these students for making Valentine's Day special for those who've served. Thank you. Merci.
The honourable member for Vancouver East.
Families of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls will gather in Vancouver East and lead the 28th Women's Memorial March in honor of loved ones lost. Since the 70s, over 900 Indigenous women and girls have gone missing from the downtown east side or have been killed. For decades, community and family members have been working day and night to get justice for their loved ones. Today, I want to acknowledge my constituent, Lorelei Williams. As a family member, she turned her grief to action and founded Butterfly in Spirits, a dance group to empower Indigenous women and girls. Lorelei won the Samara Everyday Political Citizen Award for her tireless advocacy and her frontline work. From April 4th to the 8th, survivors and family members can share their testimonies with commissioners from the National Inquiry in Vancouver. All of Canada needs to listen. We need to believe women who bring us their truths. We need justice for the women and their families. And justice means no more stolen sisters.
Honourable member for Bow River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canada needs the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion now. Hear, hear. Oil is being sold at up to 50% discount to the United States because we don't have anywhere else to sell it. The U.S. sells it back to Canada through New Brunswick refineries at the full market price. It's like if we built a car in Ontario for $30,000 and our only market was the U.S. and they took it for $15,000 but sold it back to us for $30,000. It's a ridiculous situation. By some estimates, selling oil at discount means the equivalent of one new school a day and one new hospital a week being built in the U.S. instead of Canada. We simply need to expand our pipeline capacity. The Trans Mountain expansion is a good start. It has passed environmental reviews, regulatory hurdles. Now the BC government is putting Canadian jobs and prosperity at risk. This government needs to show the leadership and get the Trans Mountain expansion project built now. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Alfred Pelon. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to recognize today all the women and girls in science for whom this International Day, February 11th, is devoted. These girls and women who dare, who achieve excellence in a field which today remains, in its majority, a men's field. This is why I want to pay tribute to them You are a source of inspiration for me, and above all, you are a source of inspiration for all girls who want to go into sciences. To the girls, I say, your future is the one that you make, and your choices are infinite.
Is the limit? Ask our Governor General. Push the limit, always go further, and know that you can accomplish anything with perseverance and determination. I believe in you. Thank you.
Questions orales, oral questions. The honourable member for Lakeland.
While the Alberta-BC dispute keeps escalating and Canadians are paying the price. The Trans Mountain expansion is in the national interest because it will create tens of thousands of jobs, add billions to the economy, and help fund important social programs. But all of it's at risk because the Prime Minister is on a vanity tour instead of doing his job to champion this federally approved pipeline. What exactly are the Liberals going to do to get this pipeline built?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I said yesterday, the decision we took on Trans Mountain expansion was the right decision based on facts and evidence and what is in the national interest. Last week, the Prime Minister indeed was in Alberta and BC defending this important project. We look forward to working with every province and territory to ensure a strong future for Canadians, but the facts and evidence do not change. This project will diversify our export markets, be built with improved environmental safety, and ensure a strong future for all Canadians. We will not allow any province to impinge the federal jurisdiction over national interests. Thank you.
Honourable member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, it's just all talk from them. The Natural Resources Minister claims he won't accept any unusual or unnecessary delays, but construction should have started in November. Right. Every day is a delay worth millions of dollars. Every day is a delay worth thousands of jobs. The Liberals know full well all of the tools available to get the Trans Mountain expansion built. If blatant stalling tactics, a full-blown interprovincial trade war, and more than a year without shovels in the ground isn't an unusual or unnecessary delay, what is?
Parliament Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, as we said, we approved the Trans Mountain expansion project. It was the right decision, and we stand by that decision. Just last week, the Prime Minister was in Alberta and BC defending that decision. The pipeline will create thousands of good-paying jobs for Canadians, middle-class jobs, which will help grow our economy and get our exports to market. Thank you.
For Lakeland.
So, Mr. Speaker, the Liberals should actually do something about it. Kinder Morgan says the Trans Mountain delays aren't normal or insignificant, and everything is on hold. The attempts to stop this project will just keep coming. The Liberals need to stop repeating the same empty lines like that. Yes. Clearly, federal approval from these Liberals means absolutely nothing. The Prime Minister just keeps saying this pipeline is going to get built. So can the Minister confirm on what date will construction start?
Parliament Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. Any decision by the BC government to limit the flow of bitumen would be outside of the province's jurisdiction. We approved a federally regulated pipeline. We stand by that decision. The pipeline will create tens of thousands of good-paying jobs across the country. It will help grow our economy. It will help get our oil off the West Coast and into expanded markets. We stand by that decision. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good job. La députée Louise Saint-Laurent.
Honourable member for Louise Saint-Laurent. Mr. Speaker, the crisis around the Trans Mountain Pipeline project is increasingly concerning. The more time passes, the worse it gets. We're talking about millions in lost investments every day and millions of dollars in lost income for Canada. These two provinces are bickering, and the role of the Prime Minister is to show real leadership. His role is to take the bull by the horns and ensure that things get done. All he said yesterday was, don't worry, it'll get done. So, Mr. Speaker, can someone in this government tell us on what date will this project go forward? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Speaker. As I said a moment ago, we made the right decision on the Trans Mountain Expansion project. That project will create tens of thousands of good-paying jobs for Canadians across the country. It will get our export product to other international markets, and any decision that any province would make, the BC government particularly, to limit the flow of bitumen would be outside of the province's jurisdiction. We stand by our decision, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Louis Saint-Laurent. Well, not much of an answer concerning the date. But the truth is simple, Mr. Speaker. We all know that the Prime Minister of Canada doesn't like Canadian oil. That's the problem. When President Obama said no to Keystone XL, the Liberals said, well, we understand. When Energy East was dropped, he said, well, that's fine. And now, he's just sitting there. He's not directly intervening. And worse, 1 year ago in Alberta, he said it's time to phase it out. He said it's time to phase out Canadian oil. That doesn't make sense. When will the Prime Minister stand up for all Canadians? Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, we will take no lessons from the party opposite in terms of energy projects. We have done more to support the Canadian energy sector in the last 2 years than the former Harper government did in 10. As I said a moment ago, we approved a nationally regulated project. The project will create tens of thousands of good-paying jobs across the country. We stand by our decision. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Berthier-Maskinongé. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister met with the CEOs of Amazon and eBay yesterday. And it's no secret that these web giants would rather have a very high threshold for taxing internet products. But the chair of the Quebec Retail Commerce Council warned that substantially increasing this limit would be totally catastrophic for small Canadian businesses who are already competing with Amazon and eBay. Does the government intend to increase this threshold as the CEOs requested? Yes or no? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Heritage. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has been very clear on this. We made a promise, and we intend to keep it. We recognize that in the long term, we need to have an overall solution to deal with the issue of taxing digital platforms. We won't do things in a piecemeal approach.
For Vancouver Kingsway.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are well aware of the many unreasonable demands being made by the Trump administration at the NAFTA table. But we now know an astronomical increase in the duty-free exemption for U.S. exports is one of the items on Trump's wish list. This means one set of tax rules for tech giants and real damage to Canadian retailers. So my question is simple. Will the Liberals stand up for Canadian businesses, or will they cave in to Donald Trump's threatening demands?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're committed to ensuring that Canada's tax system is fair and supports the objective of an economy that works for everyone. In that vein, Finance Canada regularly assesses this tax system to ensure that it's fair, that it's efficient, that it's fiscally responsible. Our tax fairness measures are focused on looking at our tax system to ensure it better supports the middle class, including increasing taxes on the wealthiest Canadians so that we can cut them for the middle class. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For Vancouver Kingsway.
Well, speaking of unfairness, Liberals' medical cannabis tax is misconceived, damaging to public health, and unfair. Patients already pay sales tax on their medical cannabis and aren't eligible for reimbursement under most insurance plans. Now, this government wants to add an excise tax. So, patients are forced to spend hundreds or thousands of dollars each month for their medicine, or choose a riskier option like an opioid because it's more affordable. That's perverse. With Budget 2018 upon us, will the Liberals listen to patients and scrap their medical cannabis tax?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our government is committed to providing reasonable access to cannabis for medical purposes while protecting the health and safety of Canadians. Health Canada is proposing to make a few targeted improvements to the regulations to create consistency in the rules between the medical and non-medical system where needed to improve patient access and to reduce the risk of abuse to the system. As recommended by the Task Force for Existing Systems for Providing Access to Cannabis for Medical Purposes would continue to exist under the proposed Cannabis Act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Berthier-Maskinongé. Mr. Speaker, there's still a lot of snow outside, but summer is just a few months away. And yet the government is still remaining very cryptic when it comes to the date of legalizing cannabis. thousands of Canadians continue to be hampered by criminal records for simple possession. We find this completely unfair. So can the government reassure these Canadians that after legalization they will be given pardons? This affects thousands of Canadians with criminal records. The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
As the Honourable Member has pointed out, this is major transformational change that is taking place in Canadian law, and that must proceed in an orderly fashion. The issue with respect to outstanding criminal records is one that we are examining in the context of overall pardon review. No decisions at this point have been taken, but that review is ongoing, and I take her point as a very strong representation.
Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Mr. Speaker, we are on the verge of seeing yet another essential Western Canada project face failure thanks to the lack of leadership by this Prime Minister. Trans Mountain Pipeline would create thousands of jobs and add billions of dollars to our economy. We lost jobs when Energy East walked away as a result of the Prime Minister's deliberate regulatory game playing. Pipelines don't build themselves. When will he take action and ensure Trans Mountain moves forward?
Parliament Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, we have taken action as opposed to the 10 years of inaction by the former Conservative government. We have approved pipelines. The Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline will create tens of thousands of good-paying jobs across the country. It will get our resources to market in a sustainable way. Mr. Speaker, we stand by our decision on the federally regulated pipeline and look forward to the next question. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For Grand Prairie, Mackenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's going to take more than wishful thinking to get Trans Mountain built.
Yes.
This Prime Minister's inaction has escalated this trade dispute between Alberta and British Columbia, costing jobs in both provinces.
Yeah.
This project will not move forward unless the Prime Minister personally intervenes and makes it happen.
That's right.
So my question is very simple. On what date will the Prime Minister guarantee that all legal impediments will be removed to allow construction to begin?
Great question.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have another comment to make, other than what the honourable member has put forward. And the suggestion that we have not, in fact, moved forward in pipelines is completely false. You may have heard me say before, many of these projects are in Alberta. The expanded export capacity for the Alberta Clipper, the Nova Gas Pipeline, the Line 3 Replacement Project, again, the Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline. We do support the Keystone XL Pipeline. I could go on and on, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Member for Abbotsford.
Natural resources contribute significantly to our prosperity. Yet this Liberal government is doing everything it can to stop mines and pipelines from being built. Yesterday, the government tabled legislation that will put even more obstacles in the way of these projects. More uncertainty, less transparency than ever before. Meanwhile, investment is fleeing. Now, the minister said no surprises, no drama. Now she can add no development. When will the Prime Minister stand up and promote Canada's resource industry?
Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to that the Prime Minister announced yesterday with Salesforce $2 billion investment in Canada. In terms of environmental assessments, we know that in the 21st century, if you want projects to go ahead, you need to protect the environment, and then they will go ahead. Under the previous government, they gutted environmental assessments. They reversed protections on fish habitat. Yesterday, I was pleased to announce that we had delivered on our promise to Canadians, that we would protect our environment and we would ensure that good projects go ahead.
For Abbotsford.
Liberals love to talk a big game, but then they always fail to deliver. The Kinder Morgan pipeline is a safe and environmentally responsible way to move oil to market. But again, the Prime Minister pretends to support this project, then refuses to be its champion. As a trade war escalates between BC and Alberta, the Prime Minister is in the U.S., hobnobbing with bigwigs, taking selfies with his billionaire friends. When will the Prime Minister finally take action, stop promoting his own interests, and become Canada's champion?
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I said a moment ago, we have done more in 2 years to support the Canadian energy sector than the former Conservative government did in 10. And just a reminder to the member opposite, any decision by the BC government to limit the flow of bitumen through the pipeline will be outside of the province's jurisdiction. Mr. Speaker, we approved the federally regulated project that will create tens of thousands of good-paying jobs across Canada. We stand by that decision.
Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Minister of the Environment tabled a bill on the environment and sustainable development. Now, 28 months ago, this Liberal government was elected on a series of false promises that they made to environmental groups. Yesterday's bill is just window dressing. The minister still has full decision-making powers. There are timelines, but the minister can always ignore them. We need to develop our resources properly and also protect them. So why won't the Minister of the Environment set up a sustainable development plan that actually balances resource use and economic development? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Mr. Speaker, this is very rich for the opposition party to be talking about environmental assessments. It was the former government that wouldn't make science-based decisions and that lost the trust of Canadians. That meant that projects couldn't go forward. I was so proud yesterday to be able to deliver on our promise to Canadians. We can protect our environment and move forward with good projects.
Alberton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals claim they want to get pipelines built quickly to support a strong economy, but clearly they didn't read their own legislation. The recent bill proposes the creation of new regulatory burdens, which, when combined with a federal carbon tax, will impede Canada's global competitiveness without enhancing environmental protection. More regulations, more wait times, reduced transparency. On top of all of this, 88,000 jobs were lost last month in Canada. When will the Prime Minister finally stand up for jobs and economic growth?
Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, I wish that the government, that the party opposite, would actually get into the 21st century. In the 21st century, the environment and the economy go together. Smart businesses know this. That is how you get projects going ahead. That's how you bring people together. That's how you create good jobs for the middle class. I wish they'd get on board with the program.
For Vancouver East.
The Liberals are quietly going ahead with a Conservative plan to shut the door for permanent residency for caregivers, meaning if your 2-year work requirement isn't completed prior to November 29, 2019, you're out of luck. There's often abuse in the program against caregivers, sometimes forcing them to end their work before the contract is completed. That means some will not be able to complete the 24-month work requirement. Does the minister think that's fair, or will he take action to ensure that caregivers are not penalized? Does he not agree that if you're good enough to work, you're good enough to stay?
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to clarify that these places offer valuable services to Canadian families. And as the Minister has said, the government will continue to allow family workers to have access to permanent residency. And we are working to improve current services and programs. And as we've said many times, Mr. Speaker, the waiting times was 7 years under the previous government, and now it's less than 12 months under this government. So we are determined to make sure that these people can help Canadian families.
For Vancouver East.
That's not what it says on the website. The chair of the Vancouver School Board is ringing the alarm bell on the fact that the federal government has consistently reduced the funding for the settlement workers in school program. There has been a 20% funding cut at a time when refugee and immigrant families are increasing, forcing the school boards to cut essential positions and programs vital to the success of students and families. The government claims that they want refugees and immigrant families to succeed. So will they put their money where their mouth is and reverse the cuts and ensure that there is stable funding for the Swiss program?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to clarify that, as you know, for the last 2 years, our government has ensured that our immigration system is strengthened. We've taken several steps to do that. For example, I mentioned reducing waiting times. Also, concerning the services that we offer to all of these organizations that help us across Canada, we're supporting them so that they can help refugees get the services that they really need to succeed and contribute to our economy. I can assure the NDP and the member across the way that we will continue to work very hard to that end to ensure that they have the resources necessary to succeed in our society and to contribute to our economy. Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's actions and his lack of judgment have forced us to review the Conflict of Interest Act. The saga of his family trip to a private island will redefine all of the criteria and limits of that act. Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister agree to give carte blanche to the new Ethics Commissioner to restore the credibility of the Prime Minister's office in Canada? And when will he pay back Canadians? The Honourable Government House Leader. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've said many times, we respect the work of the Commissioner and that office. To answer the member's question, the former Commissioner recognized that these expenses were incurred as part of the role of the Prime Minister. And this is the case for former Prime Ministers and the current Prime Minister. Whenever a Prime Minister travels, there are costs associated with security. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Beauport, Côte de Beaupré, Île d'Orléans, Charlevoix. The Prime Minister is refusing to pay back the cost of his taxpayer-funded holiday. And this week, all of his Liberal members clearly supported his decision. What a disgrace to Canadians. In addition to not answering questions, his House Leader keeps repeating that he's taking full responsibility for the report and that the spending was in line with the security expenses of all Prime Ministers. But that's false, Mr. Speaker. It's unacceptable for a Prime Minister to benefit from his office and to spend the money of honest citizens. When will he finally pay back taxpayers? Because that's what taking responsibility really means. The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, as I've said many times, immediately after the Commissioner's report was tabled, the Prime Minister did take responsibility, and we accepted the conclusions of the report. As I've said, we respect senior officials and the work that they do. Now, the former Commissioner, in her report, recognized that these expenses were incurred as part of the role of the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, and we respect her work. Thank you.
Sturgeon River, Parkland.
The Prime Minister broke the law not once, but 4 times. He says he's taken responsibility, but his words are meaningless. Canadians are looking for action. He claims this was a family vacation, and yet he brought along his political buddies. Not my idea of a family vacation. His illegal trip cost taxpayers $32,000 for jets and over $1,700 to wine and dine his political buddies. Will the Prime Minister do the right thing and pay the money back?
Hear, hear. Honourable Government House Leader.
On numerous occasions, the former Commissioner in her report acknowledged that these costs are incurred as part of the role of the Prime Minister, and this was the case for past Prime Ministers. Security agencies make recommendations, we take their expertise, and we accept their recommendations. We respect the work of the Office of the Commissioner of Ethics, and we will continue to work with her office. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For Barrie, Innisfil.
Mr. Speaker, the Trudeau report found the Prime Minister had violated 4 sections of the Ethics and Conflict of Interest Act. The Trudeau report also found the Prime Minister took an illegal vacation and billed Canadian taxpayers $200,000. The entire Liberal caucus voted against the Prime Minister being held accountable for his actions. What it means, Mr. Speaker, is that it's now an open buffet for Liberal entitlement and corruption. Why can't the Prime Minister just respect hardworking Canadians and pay back that $200,000?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, to directly respond to the member's question, the former Commissioner has acknowledged that these costs are incurred as part of the role of the Prime Minister, as was the case for former Prime Ministers, Mr. Speaker. As I have also said, it was the Conservatives that demanded that an investigation take place. Now that the investigation has concluded and the report has been released, they refuse to accept its conclusions. We on this side respect the work of officers of Parliament. We accept its findings. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
Gabriola Island opposes new freighter anchorages proposed off our shores. For Wyoming coal to China, zero local benefit. Our Chamber of Commerce, local governments, fishermen all say bulk anchorages threaten community and the sensitive ecology of our coast. Liberals promised no projects without social license, promised reports and consultation that are missing. And now that habitat protection has been restored to the Fisheries Act, it reveals this review was faulty. Will the minister listen to Gabriolans and stop these bulk anchorages now?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans.
Mr. Speaker, our government is pleased to be delivering on our promise to restore lost protections and incorporate modern safeguards into the Fisheries Act. These proposed amendments will restore lost protections by returning to comprehensive protections against harming fish and fish habitat and strengthening the role of Indigenous peoples in project reviews, monitoring, and policy. Our government will also invest more than $280 million to support the restoration of lost protections to fish and incorporating modern safeguards. We've consulted broadly to ensure changes to the Act focus on those areas that matter the most to Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Mr. Speaker, the new Navigable Waters Protection Act has created a bizarre situation. All waters are equal, but some are more equal than others. In my riding of South Okanagan, West Kootenay, Okanagan Lake is fully protected, but other lakes such as Skaha, Vaso, Asuyas, Christina, Slocan, which used to be protected pre-Harper, are not being relisted in the Liberals' legislation. It's absurd. Canadians will have to argue on a case-by-case basis to have their waters fully protected. Why won't the Liberals fully protect all our lakes and rivers in the new Act like they promised?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As mandated by the Prime Minister, our government is committed to protecting the environment, fish and waterways, respecting Indigenous rights, rebuilding public trust, and strengthening our economy. In addition, a new, more inclusive approach to the schedule would provide a greater level of oversight for navigable waters that are most important to Canadians and to Indigenous peoples, including eligible heritage rivers and our longest wild and free-flowing rivers. Over the next few months, Transport Canada will be engaging with Canadians on this new process. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Central Nova.
Mr. Speaker, Canada's fisheries and marine ecosystem hold economic, cultural and social significance for many Canadians, including so many living on the coast back home in Nova Scotia. In 2012, the previous government cut the protection of fish and their habitat, leaving significant gaps of protection for vulnerable fish species. Will the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans inform this House as to how the recently introduced Fisheries Act will restore lost protections, enshrine modern safeguards, and ensure a sustainable marine ecosystem and healthy fishery for future generations of Canadians?
Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member from Central Nova. I'd like to thank all members of the Fisheries Committee, and I'd like to thank all Canadians who participated. We consulted broadly, and we know that Canadians are proud of us for restoring protections to the Fisheries Act. We're protecting all fish habitat. We're providing increased transparency and certainty around major projects. We're protecting middle-class jobs and coastal economies. We've eliminated the damage caused by the previous government, and we're investing more than $280 million to ensure our marine environment thrives for the benefit of future generations.
Well done. The
Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Hauteville. Mr. Speaker, several times I've asked the Prime Minister about his promise to veterans during the last election campaign. Instead of answering, he leaves the responsibility to his MPs, who offer only platitudes. Veterans who have sacrificed themselves feel abandoned and forgotten. Will the Prime Minister show a little heart and tell us in the House today if he will finally keep his promise and stop fighting our veterans in court? They've suffered enough. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Veterans Affairs. We have committed to supporting the health of veterans and their families. Changes to the new Veterans Charter offer. We've also moved on to add from the Charter to offering a pension for life. We wish to recognize their suffering and pain and offer additional compensation to those who need help to reestablish themselves, which represents 90% of the salary of soldiers who have been discharged. We work closely with our veterans and we appreciate them.
First, Moose Mountain.
Mr. Speaker, we know that the Prime Minister has already broken his campaign promise to stop fighting veterans groups in court. As if that wasn't bad enough, He then had the audacity to look a wounded veteran in the eye and tell him that veterans are asking more than his government can afford to give. How can the Prime Minister justify spending taxpayers' dollars on his personal vacations when he can't even support the veterans who have sacrificed so much for him to have that privilege in the first place?
Yeah. Parliament Secretary to the Minister of Veterans Affairs. Order.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker.
Veterans is a priority. That is why we've committed to a promise for Pension for Life option, a plan designed to help veterans live a full and productive life post-service. Our new Pension for Life is monthly payable. It is recognizing pain and suffering, tax-free, and provides income replacement supplement at 90% of a veteran's pre-release salary. The Conservatives had 10 years, Mr. Speaker, to make changes to the veterans that they were asking for. They did nothing. They closed offices, cut budgets, and ignored the voices of our veterans. We will not.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-Lérable. Mr. Speaker.
Will be directly impacted by Canada's new food guide. Experts, including physicians, are concerned that the proposed change to the Canadian food guide are based on ideology rather than on good science. Why are the Liberals refusing to hear from farmers and producers in both the Health and Agri Committee? Why did all the Liberals members on the Agri Committee turn their back Wednesday on the very ones they're supposed to serve? When will someone on the other side finally stand up for our farmers?
The Honourable Minister of Health. Order.
Mr. Speaker, our government is committed to protecting the health and safety of Canadians and protecting an environment that makes the healthy choice the easier choice. Over 70 years, Canada's Food Guide has been Canada's most trusted source of information on healthy eating. As a part of the Healthy Eating Strategy, work to update Canada's Food Guide is well underway, and we are engaging with Canadians, experts, and stakeholders. Health Canada is committed to using the best available evidence in making the decision. And today, I look forward to making an announcement this afternoon on our Healthy Eating Strategy. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Mégantic-Lérable. No farmer or producer was involved in this reform. The multi-party agricultural caucus, led by the Liberal MP for Tobic-Matakwak, heard from Dr. Samis this week. Many of us heard from him. He is an eminent specialist, a heart surgeon, who clearly showed that the new food guide is based on ideology instead of science. Unfortunately, on Wednesday, the Liberal members of the Standing Committee on Agriculture refused to hear what agricultural producers had to say. They who wrap themselves up in the virtues of science, why do they refuse to hear what our producers have to say? The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government will protect the health of Canadians and make sure that the guide proposes correct choices. The food guide is part of the Healthy Eating Guide, or Healthy Eating Strategy. We are working with all Canadians and experts. Health Canada commits to using the best data available when making decisions regarding the food guide. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, in the election, the Liberals said they believe the Government of Canada has a sacred obligation to Canada's veterans. In fact, they voted in favour of an NDP motion to the same effect. The Liberals' platform said, quote, "Veterans and their families have earned our respect and gratitude. It's time our government lived up to its sacred obligation to them. Our plan, we will ensure that no veteran has to fight the government for the support and compensation they have earned," end quote. Simple question for the Liberals. Does your government still believe that the Government of Canada has a, quote, sacred obligation to Canada's veterans?
Parliament Secretary to the Minister of Veterans Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I'm so glad to get up today to talk about the things that we're doing to help our veterans and their families. Let me run through a few examples of some of the things that we've done in our Pension for Life. For example, a retired naval supply technician with 12 years of service and a 40% disability will receive nearly $5,000 a month in pain and suffering and income replacement benefits. Should he wish to go back to school, Mr. Speaker, he'd also be entitled to an additional $80,000 to help cover the cost of tuitions. He will also have access to career transition services and help find meaningful work in civilian life. Veterans asked for change for years. Over the last 2 years, we've delivered and we will continue to deliver to support our veterans and their families. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Mr. Speaker, student associations, teachers support the recommendation to invest more in the post-secondary education of Indigenous students. In 2014, the population of Indigenous children went up by 30%. It is not normal that the government is maintaining a 2% cap on investment in post-secondary education. When will the Liberals keep their promise and adequately fund the post-secondary studies of First Nations? The Honourable Member of Indigenous Services.
Important question, and also very pleased to correct the record. There is no 2% cap. Let's be clear about that. We have made investments in education in the order of $2.6 billion so far. We are currently reviewing all programs related to post-secondary education along with our partners, First Nations, Inuit and Métis, and look forward to doing even more to advance opportunities for post-secondary education.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton West.
Mr. Speaker, Canada's infrastructure security should be a top priority for this government. Yet despite concerns from security professionals, they're allowing a state-owned Chinese takeover of Aecon. Will the Minister of Public Service do the best thing for Canada's national security and commit to a full Section 25 national security review?
Parliament Secretary to the Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, as a government, we try to encourage foreign investment because that makes such a big difference with respect to Canadian jobs. Every single such investment of a certain magnitude will be subject to the Investment Canada Act. As this investment is, it will therefore go through a rigorous review process. It's a multi-step process that will include input from our security agencies. Mr. Speaker, we've never compromised national security, and we never will. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Montmagny, Lila, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. This morning we found out in La Presse that the Minister of Procurement took the time to visit the Irving Naval Shipyard several times and met with its directors, but her office systematically refused requests to meet with people from Davie and didn't attend the launching of Asterix. Does she have a problem with the fact that it's in Quebec, or is the department known for $8 million skating rinks, afraid that a company like Davie, which delivers on time and at a lower cost, makes the other shipyards look bad? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Services. Our department is very committed to ensuring that our Navy has the ships essential to its work, that the Coast Guard also has the ships it needs to accomplish its work. That is why she is highly committed to all of the shipyards in Canada, including Davie. The member knows very well that we have started discussing matters with Davie today.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal government pledged to support home and palliative care in Budget 2016. Unfortunately, we heard at Health Committee that they've done almost nothing to implement that promise. It's going to take more than wishful thinking to roll out palliative care for Canadians. I've recommended that the government invest in hospice infrastructure, training of care providers, and home care transfers to the provinces, but they've not done anything. When will this government show some leadership and take action to fulfill their promise?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we know that the majority of Canadians want to stay independent and receive the care they need within their homes. Quality and palliative care are critical to making this happen. In addition to the Canada Health Transfer, our government is providing $6 billion in federal funding directly to provinces and territories to better support home care, including palliative care. Mr. Speaker, our government was pleased to support Bill C-277 and look forward to working collaboratively with provinces and territories and stakeholders as we move forward. And also, Mr. Speaker, I'm in the final stages of completing some bilateral agreements with several of the provinces, and we look forward to working again with them. Thank you.
Good. Honourable Member for Scarborough Agincourt.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Science was recently in Toronto to meet with leading artificial intelligence researchers to talk about Canadian AI leadership. We can harness that work to provide benefits for Canadians. In the last year, we have seen internationally leading companies investing in new AI research labs in cities across Canada, including Toronto, Montreal, and Edmonton. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Science explain how our government is supporting this important sector and how these international partnerships will help Canada remain a world leader in AI research and innovation?
Good question. Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Science.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague from Scarborough Agincourt for her hard work promoting Canada's AI strategy. Our government is committed to supporting research and innovation to grow our economy and improve the lives of Canadians. We're building on Canada's international leadership in artificial intelligence by investing $125 million in a pan-Canadian strategy that is helping attract international investment, recruit and retain world-leading talent in Canada, and create new, well-paying jobs for Canadians. Centered around Canada's leading scientists who are working with industry partners and universities, our approach will help ensure all Canadians benefit from the exciting opportunities of this innovative sector. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, we've been counting, and it's been 25 months since the minister gutted the Financial Transparency Act. Band members continue to be forced to take their leadership to court to get access to basic financial information. The Liberals met for a year with the AFN. A year. Their so-called new fiscal framework does nothing to improve accountability for the vast majority of First Nations. When will the minister stop ignoring band members like Charmaine Stick, Harrison Thunderchild, and so many more, and actually come up with a plan?
Yes, Minister for Indigenous Services.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very delighted to answer this question. In fact, it gives me an opportunity to talk about a new fiscal relationship. A fiscal relationship that's based on the recognition of rights, that has a relationship with First Nations and Inuit and Métis people that is respectful. And in fact, we are doing work through the Assembly of First Nations and through other groups to make sure that our new policies will be respectful, will help to build capacity for First Nations, and will have reporting that is done in a respectful way to the appropriate people. Thank you.
Member for Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam.
Mr. Speaker, because of climate change, weather-related natural disasters are becoming more severe, more frequent, and more expensive. At the same time, as we take action to put a price on carbon and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, it is critical that we help communities become more resilient in the face of increased risks of flood, fire, and natural disasters. Can the Minister of Public Safety tell us what the government is doing to help communities in BC become better prepared to deal with environmental challenges? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good question.
Well, Member for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, my thanks to the member for Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam. Last week, we partnered with the province of British Columbia to announce over $10 million in funding for 30 projects under the National Disaster Mitigation Program. These include flood mitigation infrastructure, flood mapping, and risk assessments to help communities prepare for the risks. We'll continue working to help reduce the impacts of severe weather events because prevention is always better and always cheaper than rebuilding afterward.
Member for Carleton.
Mr. Speaker, there are over 1 million Canadians with disabilities who have jobs and contribute to our economy. 300,000 of them have severe disabilities. But Stats Canada reports that tens of thousands of people with disabilities are effectively banned from working because clawbacks and taxes make them poorer when they do. Shame. My Opportunity Act would impose one simple rule that governments must respect: that workers with disabilities must always be able to gain more from wages than they lose to clawbacks and taxes. Does this government support that principle?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Ensuring that people with disabilities and indeed all Canadians get the opportunity to succeed is a priority of our government. This is an important conversation, and I thank the member for raising it. We can always do better when it comes to championing disabled workers and ensuring that they get the benefits they deserve. And our government is committed to taking a holistic approach to ensure greater accessibility and opportunities for Canadians with disabilities in their communities and workplaces. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for La Pointe de l'Île. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals like to say that they defend Francophones outside Quebec, but for decades they have refused to see the rates of assimilation that have increased with every census. The new president of the Federation of Francophone and Acadian Communities demands concrete action before March 31st. They're asking for $575 million. That's a minimum. Will the government wake up It's enough with the consultations. It's time to act. Will he meet the demands of the FCFA before March 31st? The Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Canadian Heritage. Mr. Speaker, we've already listened to the comments of the FCFA, and we are preparing an action plan. We're going to deliver on it. We will always defend both of our official languages. As an example, we've reestablished the Francophone immigration program, appointed bilingual judges to the Supreme Court, reset up the legal challenges program, and we have promoted French language in Lac-Saint-Jean. We will always defend the French language. The Honourable Member for Mirabel. Mr. Speaker, the day before yesterday, the House unanimously reiterated that there should be no breach in the supply management system within the future Trans-Pacific Partnership. That means no gap whatsoever. That just increased the negotiating power of the government. Has the government informed the 10 other countries involved of the unanimous will of the House? The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
CPTPP gives farmers and ranchers right across this country a great opportunity, and of course it would put dollars in their pocket. But of course this government has and will continue to support the supply management system. It's the party that fought to put the system in place, and it's the government that will continually defend it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Joliette. Mr. Speaker, you must be exhausted by all of the opposition between Liberal ministers. On the one hand, the Minister of Revenue says she's fighting very, very hard against tax havens, and on the other, the Minister of Finance continues to legalize new tax havens. With Grenada, Antigua and Barbuda, Canada is about to have access to 26 tax havens. 26 tax havens to avoid paying taxes completely legally. Do you think the Minister of Revenue can convince her colleague in the Department of Finance to not legalize these two new tax havens? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Our government is fighting tax evasion, which is why we have invested less than $1 billion. Our agency is looking at the activities of all companies and transactions over $10,000 in 4 jurisdictions. All the high-risk transactions are reviewed very carefully. Tax cheats can no longer hide. The Honourable Member for Joliette. Well, evidently, Mr. Speaker, the answer is no. As you know, Grenada is a very special tax haven. For these empty shells, it's 0 taxes, but also 0 income tax statements and 0 annual reports. What information can the government obtain from these places? All the Minister of Finance wants is to have more tax havens where no taxes are paid. That's what we see in the briefing note provided by the government and the note on Antigua and Barbuda. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister of Finance make amends and not legalize these last 2 tax havens? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. Fighting tax evasion and abusive or rather aggressive tax planning is a priority for our government, and we are working very closely with our partners internationally. When it is a worldwide problem for which there is no simplistic solution, as my colleagues seem to think on the other side, we have had to adopt international standards regarding sharing information with our OECD partners. And now we're going to have access to more information from all of our partners through these agreements. This concludes oral questions for today.
Dépôt de document. Introduction of government bills. Dépôt de projet de loi émanant du gouvernement.
Introduction of government bills. Statements by ministers.
Parliamentary delegations. Presenting reports from committees. Présentation de rapport de comité. Introduction of private members' bills. Dépôt de projet de loi émanant des députés.
Introduction of private members' bills.
Public bills. Motions. Motion. Presenting petitions. Présentation de pétitions. The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to present a petition signed by dozens of Canadian scientists, health researchers, and members of civil society working in the little-discussed field of neglected tropical diseases. These petitioners are calling on the Government of Canada to join the global movement underway since 2012 to eliminate and control NTDs by signing the London Declaration on Neglected Tropical Diseases. The petitioners call on the Government of Canada to take a leadership role in reaching the 2020 control and elimination goals outlined in the Declaration, thereby significantly improving the lives of millions of people worldwide. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Presenting petitions, the honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to present a petition signed by residents of the riding of Avalon, Newfoundland, regarding this government's proposed attestation requiring Canada Summer Jobs Programs applicants to have the same views as the government, even though they are in contravention of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The petitioners call on the Prime Minister to defend the freedoms of conscience, thought and belief, and withdraw the attestation requirement for applicants to the Canada Summer Jobs Program due today. Thank you.
Presenting petitions, the honourable member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To protect our coast and fill a big hole in federal leadership that's existed for decades, petitioners call on the government to deal with the long-standing problem of abandoned vessels, and in particular to legislate improving vessel registration, to put a fee on vessel registration to deal with the cost of vessel disposal to get the cost off the backs of taxpayers, and to pilot a vessel turn-in program. These were all elements of my bill that was blocked by the government, Bill C-352, and now is being raised in testimony at the Transport Committee by repeated witnesses. It's very good reinforcement for the voices here from Prince Rupert, White Rock, Surrey, Delta, Abbotsford, Bella Coola, Williams Lake, and Battle, BC. Thank you.
Presenting petitions, the honourable member for Saskatoon University.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to present a petition from people across Saskatchewan and Alberta who are troubled by discrimination against Christians. They call on the House to protect the conscience rights of doctors and nurses who refuse to participate in euthanasia, and they also call for a review of future legislation so that constitutional rights of Christians are not violated.
Presenting petitions, the honourable member for Edmonton West.
Speaker, it's my pleasure to present a petition from a constituent in my riding, along with 590 signatories, calling on the government to include registered respiratory therapists on the list of approved transnational visa medical and allied professionals. Due to labour shortages for respiratory therapists in both Canada and the United States, both countries would benefit from the movement of skilled workers across our borders. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Presenting petitions, the honourable member for Vancouver East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to table two petitions. The first one is signed by close to 700 individuals, and the petitioner notes that the outline spousal sponsorship process takes more than a year, even up to 3 years, while the application is stuck in the security screening despite the absence of a criminal record. They note that often CBSA is the area where the holdback is occurring, and that there are no time limits to which CBSA can delay an application. So the petitioners are therefore calling for the government to give priority to outline spousal sponsorship cases in CBSA, to define a 6-month time frame for security screening, and that if the security screening is taking more than 6 months, that together with Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada issue a dual intent visitor visa or super visa for the spouses. Mr. Speaker, I have dozens of young people, young Canadians who signed this petition, and they're calling on the government to take meaningful steps to support the future of young Canadians and fulfill Canada's obligation under the Paris Agreement by adopting a detailed climate action strategy that includes science-based targets for greenhouse gas reduction with a plan to meet them, including but not limited to implementing a comprehensive and steadily rising national carbon pricing beyond 2022 that rises to $150 per ton by 2030, and eliminating the fossil fuel subsidies and redirecting those investments into renewable energy systems, energy efficiency, low-carbon transportation, and job training.
Presenting petitions. Présentation de pétitions. Questions on the order paper. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would ask that all questions be allowed to stand at this time, please.
Is that agreed? Agreed? Agreed and so ordered. Chair has received a notice for a request for emergency debate. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Here. Mr. Speaker, the recent dispute between two provinces, British Columbia and Alberta, threatens the development of a project that is agreed by many in the House of Commons and indeed all across Canada to be of vital national interest, including by the current government. The construction of new energy infrastructure is critical for economic growth and for job creation, not just at the provincial level, but indeed at the national level. Materials, manufacturing, logistics, and labor are all supported through the construction of these projects that are truly nation-building. Le processus décisionnel indépendant.
The independent decision-making process should be based on evidence, and the evidence shows that we can have this extension while maintaining safety and security. This means we have to act.
Is making it harder to provide regulatory certainty, predictability, and clarity that will ensure the viability of major projects like Trans Mountain now and well into the future. That is why the crisis we face as we stand here today is so urgent. The Trans Mountain Pipeline project is under serious threat as the dispute between British Columbia and Alberta continues to escalate. The situation threatens the jobs of thousands of Canadians across the country. There has been so far a complete lack of federal leadership to resolve this situation. That cannot continue. Nous pensons que la Chambre des communes.
We believe that the House of Commons should discuss all options in order to put an end to this crisis.
To find a solution to this roadblock. Now, the Prime Minister is very good at words, Mr. Speaker. He's making a lot of statements. But this project was approved back in the fall, and to date, no action has been taken. This emergency debate is so vital today because every day that goes by jeopardizes this project and indeed every energy project as this Liberal government continues to add new hurdles and new barriers to development. Now, I understand, Mr. Speaker, that we do have supply days next week, but as I mentioned, I do hope you'll find that this particular situation is very urgent and does meet the test in the standing orders. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, I thank the Honourable Leader of the Opposition for bringing this to the attention of the House. However, I'm not persuaded that it actually meets the requirements of the standing orders and the authorities and conventions that are set out at this time. As the Honourable Leader of the Opposition mentioned, of course, there are other opportunities to bring this kind of matter before the House, and I urge him to look at those possibilities. Again, I thank him for raising the issue for the House for its consideration. Orders of the day, ordre du jour.
Government bills, a comment, resuming debate at the third reading stage of Bill C-50, an act to amend the Canada Elections Act, political financing.
Lorsque la Chambre a pris...
When the House, the Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi, when last we discussed this motion, had so much time for her speech. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as we are still on C-50, I'd like to talk about the reasons we're here. We're discussing this bill whose aim is to sort of launder the reputation of the Liberals, especially after the vacations of the Prime Minister with the Aga Khan, and this was reprimanded by the Ethics Commissioner recently. As we exercise democracy, we discuss things like why Liberals have been selling cash for access. Was it $1,500, is this sort of the maximum that a party can be given federally? In 2016, the Prime Minister went to the home of a rich businessman where everyone paid $1,500 to have access to the Prime Minister. He went to receptions at the homes of very wealthy people in order to meet with people who had an interest in the infrastructure bank, or others like Chinese businessmen who wanted to buy businesses like telecommunications businesses in BC, or others had an interest in selling cannabis. So very influential people who had a lot of money and who managed to get a private meeting at a reception, a private meeting with the Prime Minister. So all this was made public, and all Canadians became aware of it, and this was a very embarrassing situation. It was an embarrassing situation for the Finance Minister as well, and the Justice Minister. Selling this idea of cash for access is a very delicate thing. The Finance Minister had a cocktail party where people paid $1,500 a pop, and there were a lot of people from Bay Street, and yet the Finance Minister is supposed to be fair-minded and fair-handed with all Canadians. But he didn't seem to have a problem from getting money from some of the big money men and women in this world. Mr. Speaker, what was the ethics conflict, the conflict of interest for the Justice Minister? Well, she went to a reception, not even in her riding, and when we know that it's the Justice Minister who has to approve the appointment of judges to courts in Canada, well, there was a problem with one particular reception. We also have to know that sometimes there are conflict of interest problems when people are trying to raise money for a candidate, when you're trying to support a candidate and that candidate's getting proper publicity. This is all subject to various discussions, but it does help to have access to a minister. The code stipulates that there should be no preferential access to the government or any appearance of preferential activity to persons for any financial reasons. But this was exactly what happened. Very few of our citizens or people in my riding can afford to pay $1,500 for a reception. When people do, they are expecting something for their money. This, you'd have to look perhaps at a minister's address book to get at an idea of how a project would how a project would go, but they would have the opportunity perhaps to whisper some words in the minister's ear or make their requests known. I think it was up to the media to talk about what kind of reception it was and the kind of people who were there.
Now, you might think that's the objective of C50, but as the Liberals have done, they invented something called the Laurier Club. And in some circumstances, like during a party congress, for example, or party convention, people can give donations of up to $1,500, the maximum. And they can give the names and address of those donors who give those donations. But with C50, donations between $200 and $1,500 would need to be published within 30 days via Elections Canada. And any fundraising activity, including the Prime Minister, party leaders, or ministers, would have to be announced several days in advance. And we think that's good, and that's why we're supporting this bill, but that doesn't mean that there won't be people hiding and trying to avoid that disclosure. Because they could buy a seat worth $1,500 and then just call that something that's within the Liberal Party convention, for example. So once again, this is a bill that says it's going to do one thing, like improve transparency, but in fact it does the opposite, because there's a bit of a shell game going on here and a bit of a loophole that allows people to continue to give Liberal Party donors a way out so that their names and addresses aren't published except at a final report at the end of the year. So this allows people to continue having these sort of suspicious receptions with privileged access to the Prime Minister and ministers. Is this loophole fair? Well, the NDP thinks it isn't, and it should be deleted. But the Liberals flat out rejected that idea. Every time that we make a recommendation in committee, the Liberals just gleefully turn us down. But why would they turn it down? I mean, if this improves the bill, if this improves transparency, if their goal is to be more accountable to the public and fairer and more transparent, well then why would they turn down the idea of getting rid of this privileged access? We don't know. I mean, maybe the Liberals like taking advantage of that money. And then there's also a discussion of giving more investigatory powers to the Commissioner to ensure that policies are fair and that they have the trust of the public. Now, once again, this was an NDP recommendation, but that was also rejected out of hand by the Liberals. There have been many committee studies where the NDP has proposed a whole series of recommendations, and the Liberals have just ignored them or waved them off. But this is part of democracy. If we can't even offer reasonable recommendations based on expert advice and common sense, and if the Liberal majority always gets their way because they just categorically refuse to listen to reason or to be open to these ideas, then what's the point of having committees? What's the point of having witnesses come and appear one after the other making recommendations if those recommendations are never heard? So they can say, oh, we consulted. You know, we know the Liberals just love consulting. They consult with farmers, too. The farmers keep being told that they're being consulted and that they want to know how to maintain supply management and how to maintain family farms in Canada. You know, they keep being told that they're going to be consulted, that they're going to be listened to, that they're really important. But in the end, they don't get what they need. So here with C50, it's the same thing. We have very fair, significant, and reasonable recommendations that would improve C50, that would make it more than a smokescreen, but unfortunately the Liberals have just thrown those recommendations out. Now, parties conduct fundraisers, and we certainly could improve democracy if there was a better sense of ethics and morals, but the Liberals aren't going in that direction. If the bill doesn't go far enough, you know, there is an attempt at transparency here, but this still allows cash for access. This is a scandal that has been in the headlines for the last 6 months or so. It's still in the headlines because it's still a common practice among certain parties like the Liberals. And I'll say again, you know, this was a Liberal promise in 2015. So they're really betraying the people who voted for the Prime Minister. because they had promised electoral reform. That was something that people really, really wanted, especially young people. It was a way of getting people involved in politics, maybe to run or at least to be interested in debates and political issues. You know, young people were asked to bring ideas forward and get involved. But then, you know, one of the ideas that was really popular among youth and that really gave them hope was electoral reform. But in the end, they said, oh, well, you know, this isn't going to happen. And so young people are thinking this was all for nothing. Now, youth voter turnout has decreased by 30% in the last 30 years. Nobody seems to think this is a problem. The Liberals don't think that this needs to be fixed. Well, of course, they're in power, they have a majority government. But all of these young people who believed in this will now be disappointed. And, you know, we're telling them, you know, don't worry, you try to keep hope. There are still some people who have integrity in politics, but it's really hard when time after time these promises are being broken. And it's hard to make people believe that there may still be politicians who are upstanding and can be trusted. Electoral reform was not just any election campaign promise. It was a very public and solemn election campaign promise. And the government really did a 180 on that promise, after dangling it in front of people as a great promise. And that really came to nothing. They made people believe that, you know, the legislators just couldn't come to a consensus on this. But as I said, almost 90% of people agreed. The Conservatives, the NDP, the Bloc, and the Green, everyone agreed that we need electoral reform and we need to have some sort of proportional system in whatever our next voting system is. But the Liberals didn't think that was enough of a consensus. It's clear that a mixed proportional representation system was really a consensus among experts and many political parties. That would allow the voices of every Canadian to be heard. So for all of these reasons, I find that Bill C-50 is really shoddily constructed. There is room for some additional transparency, certainly, but this is really only the tip of the iceberg. The Liberals could have gone so much further. We hope that they will see reason and that they will be open to our recommendations and the recommendations of other parties and experts. And, you know, in the bill, there is a plan for fines if parties don't respect the rules. It's a $1,000 fine. But a former chief electoral officer said that this fine certainly wouldn't be sufficient to dissuade parties from breaking the law because, I mean, $1,000, if the maximum donation limit is $1,500, well, they're still making a good profit. So they still have an incentive to get more money in their coffers. It's not difficult for them to pay a $1,000 fine. It's just a ridiculous penalty. So this is really just a smokescreen. And it's a way for them to try and, you know, regain the trust of the public and improve their public perception, but that's it. I think the Liberals need to go back to the drawing table, improve this bill, and make it properly ethical and moral. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for her speech. She seemed to focus quite a bit on the Liberals and this particular piece of legislation is focusing on all parties, making sure that we have openness and transparency in terms of our fundraising across parties. So I would like to ask her thoughts on the legislation requiring political leaders in particular to have increased openness and transparency as related to their fundraising activities.
La députée de Salaberry.
The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, my colleague. It's true that the bill will affect all members, including the Prime Minister, ministers, and party leaders. But if she agrees with the idea of improving transparency, then why did the Chief Electoral Officer not have access to investigatory powers? Why has the Liberal Party accepted that during conventions, Laurier Club members can still participate in these events and give the maximum donation without being forced to give their name or address? Because that's still allowed. We asked the Liberal Party in committee to get rid of that loophole, and the Liberals refused. So are they really in favor of more transparency if they're still allowing this privileged access to ministers and the Prime Minister? Because there is a path here for Laurier Club members, for example. So the answer should be no, based on what she said, and yet the Liberals are just saying, no, let's leave things the way they are. We don't want to give any investigatory powers to the Chief Electoral Officer. So all of this is still going on. All of this is still legal, and it's totally shameless. I don't understand why this is their approach, unless what they want to do is just to continue making money from rich people and giving access to rich people. There are people who have trouble having access to the CRA, for example. There are people who can't access their guaranteed income supplement. They just want to get in touch with civil servants, but they can't, and they don't have $1,500 to get their message across. But Laurier Club members have all kinds of money, so they give their money, and then they get access to ministers, to the Prime Minister, to party leaders, because they can just use the cover of the party convention. Is that fair? Is that ethical? Is that transparent? Absolutely not.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to hear my New Democrat colleagues' views in this area. I think we all hear that our constituents, voters, Canadians want to see themselves reflected both in the government, in the seats that are here, but also reflected in the outcome of public consultations and public participation. And we've certainly, I know both of our very active youth activists especially feel deeply betrayed by the government abandoning its promise, repeated 1,500 times, that it would make every vote count. It had broad public support, and the committee, this parliamentary committee, made a lot of strong recommendations that the government totally ignored. Then on this bill, C-50, it feels, well, for one, it feels like a distraction from that broken promise on true democratic reform. But also, the Liberal government ignored the previous committee study in the previous parliament that could have informed this work, and then also ignored the amendments that the NDP made at committee, just didn't even give them consideration. So my question is how do these betrayals affect public support for the political process and for the democratic process, and what is lost when those promises are broken?
La députée de Salaberry.
The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague is completely right. Experts, young people, and all Canadians took this as a betrayal. And that means that people become even more cynical. I don't know how we could be any more cynical, because voter turnout to elections are already really low. So why didn't the Liberals keep this promise? You know, before, during, and after the elections, they said about 1,500 times that they were going to move forward with electoral reform They were going to ensure that the 2015 election was the last one under the first-past-the-post system, because that's what people had been calling for years. There have been scientific studies done over the last 30 years saying that if you want people to feel more involved in politics and want to feel like their vote matters and that their opinions are heard, then this system needs to be reformed. But the Liberals and the Prime Minister used that election promise to get people's support, and then a year ago they just turned their back on all these people. There was a CBC interview in the Library of Parliament where he said, well, it was never my intention to have electoral reform, but if people still want to talk about it, well, then, maybe we can talk about a preferential system, like a ranked ballot. Wow, is that his concept of electoral reform now? A couple years ago, it was very different. Now, when you know that they're spending all this money to go all across Canada consulting people, there's a multi-party committee, and they're traveling all around talking to experts, and, they're spending a lot of money to do this. In the end, 80% of Canadians said they wanted some sort of proportional system. 90% of experts agreed that that was the right direction to go in. And then in the end, the Prime Minister says, oh, well, I don't know if this is really convincing. If that's not enough to convince you, then what facts do you need? What facts and what evidence are you looking at if 90% of experts isn't enough and 80% popular support isn't enough? Is that how you respect the desires of Canadians? Is that how you act representative? I don't think so. Now, he essentially used his veto right on this. That's not very democratic. And this means that people are losing hope, they're losing trust, and this affects every member of Parliament and everyone who's interested in politics. It's very sad. Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for her very relevant comments. Last year, I was part of the Electoral Reform Committee. We traveled all across Canada from coast to coast, and I was one of those members that went up to the north of Canada, which was very, very interested. I'm very glad that I was able to visit Whitehorse and Yellowknife. Now, it's very remarkable that we actually had unanimity among party members. Conservative, the Green Party, the Bloc, the NDP, the Liberals. We all wanted a reform, and we wanted a referendum. Now, this is very important. We wanted to leave this choice to citizens so that they could decide if we would go forward with this. And then the Prime Minister realized that he was no longer in control of the game, and so he changed his idea. So I'd like to hear my colleagues' thoughts about the fact that there was unanimity among opposition parties, and then and it was a good idea because we ultimately were going to defer to Canadians via a referendum. The Honourable Member. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague is completely right. How often do you see all opposition parties agreeing in the House of Commons? How often do you see them agreeing to give voice to Canadians? There's probably only a few times in history when this has happened. And we really wanted to give people the opportunity to express themselves on this. Now, the opposition parties represent 60% of people because the Liberals were elected with only 40% of the vote, even if they have a majority government. That means that the Prime Minister chose deliberately to ignore 60% of Canadians when he decided to do a 180 and say, well, you know what, actually, I'm not interested in this anymore. I'm not convinced, even though 90% of experts who appeared before committee agreed. All the work that you did in committee, all of that traveling from coast to coast, well, we're going to forget about it. And, I think we'll do maybe a different kind of home survey and see if people have more interesting things to say. Although, of course, in the survey, there was never a direct question asked along the lines of, do you think that our system should be reformed, and which system do you prefer? There were no clear questions. Everything was vague. And the Liberals are boasting that they were responsible, ethical, democratic. And I just don't understand. There's such a chasm between the perception of the Liberals and the reality of the consultations that were led by my honourable colleague, among others.
Debate. The honourable member for Perth Wellington.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always a pleasure to rise in this House, and it's particularly an honour to rise on a Friday afternoon when so many of my friends and colleagues have joined us in the House today to listen to my speech. It's always a great honour to have so many people tuning in. It reminds me a little bit of when I was a lecturer at King's University College at Western, and so many people would turn up for my lectures on Canadian public administration. They were always just hanging on every word until I had to wake them up and then realize that they may not have been paying as much attention as I thought. But it is a pleasure to speak today on Bill C-50. And as a member of the Procedure and House Affairs Committee, I am well acquainted with this piece of legislation, having sat on the committee and heard from a number of witnesses and participated in the examination of this bill. Bill C-50 is really just about legitimizing the Liberal cash for access events. So often, the Liberal Party tries to tell Canadians that we're different. This time, the Liberal Party is different. We're not like those Liberals of the past anymore. Oh no. No, the days of the sponsorship scandal, that's not us anymore. The days of Gomery, oh no. Those days are gone. The days of being entitled to our entitlements, those days are gone. This is a different Liberal Party. In fact, the Prime Minister told Canadians hand over heart that the Liberal Party was different. Prime Minister said there should be no preferential access to government or appearance of preferential access accorded to individuals or organizations because they have made financial contributions to politicians and political parties. But yet, shortly after this government was elected, that's exactly what happened. We saw a string of cash for access events in which high-profile Liberal politicians hosted events where donors gave significant amounts of money to the Liberal Party. In exchange, these donors got private, one-on-one access with senior Liberal ministers. Senior Liberal ministers that many of these donors could potentially have business with the government, could potentially have business with these same ministers, Mr. Speaker. Most Canadians know this is wrong. Most Canadians know that this is not an appropriate way for ministers of the Crown, those who serve our country. It's not an appropriate way for them to operate. But with these Liberals, old habits die hard. And we shouldn't be too surprised when these Liberals form government that these types of cash for access events would happen. After all, these Liberals learned from the best. These Ottawa Liberals learned from their Ontario counterparts. These Ottawa Liberals learned from Kathleen Wynne and Dalton McGuinty and their great success fundraising through cash for access events. I want to quote from a Globe and Mail article from July 6, 2016. The title is An Inside Look at Cash for Access Ontario Liberal Fundraisers. The article reads, on the evening of March 2, 2015, Premier Kathleen Wynne gathered 8 guests who paid $10,000 each for exclusive FaceTime. 3 months earlier, 22 donors spent $5,000 apiece to be entertained by Finance Minister Charles Sousa. Days later, 8 people shelled out $5,000 each to attend a reception with then Energy Minister Bob Chiarelli. These were just 3 of the more than 150 intimate cash for access fundraisers the Ontario Liberal Party held in Ms. Wynne's first 3 years in power. At the events, contributors paid thousands of dollars each to bend the ears of the Premier and members of her cabinet privately, typically over cocktails and dinner at 5-star hotels or high-end restaurants. So, Mr. Speaker, the Ottawa Liberals had a great roadmap from their friends in Ontario. So what happened? What happened once these Liberals formed government? Well, they quickly started implementing cash for access events. Chinese billionaires have been attending Liberal fundraisers even though they're not allowed to donate because they are not Canadian citizens. One of these individuals, Zhang Bin, who is also a Communist Party apparatchik, attended a May 19, 2016 fundraiser at the Toronto home of Chinese Business Chamber of Commerce chairperson Benson Wong, according to the report in the Globe and Mail. A few weeks later, Mr. Chang and a business partner donated $200,000 to the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation and $50,000 to build a statue of the current Prime Minister's father. On November 7, 2016, BC multimillionaire Miafai Pan hosted a fundraiser at his West Vancouver mansion. And at this event, that was of course a pay-to-play event, Chinese investment in seniors' care and real estate developments was certainly a topic of discussion. And this event took place while the federal government was reviewing a $1 billion bid by China's Onbang Insurance Group to buy one of British Columbia's largest retirement and nursing home chains. In Toronto, another example of cash for access, in which an event with the Justice Minister with a $1,500 paycheck, again, with a minister who could potentially having dealings with these same donors. When the Liberal Party promised real change, this was certainly not what Canadians were expecting. Canadians know this is wrong. Canadians know that this type of cash for access event isn't right. And in fact, a 2016 Nanos research survey showed that more than 6 in 10 Canadians disapprove of this type of event. They disapprove of the political parties holding fundraising events in which cash for access is sold to Canadians. And you have to wonder, Mr. Speaker, why the Liberals are so eager to raise money through cash for access event. Well, one reason, Mr. Speaker, is that they're failing to raise money through other means. Time and time again, we see the Conservative Party outraising the Liberal Party. And why do they do that? Why do we outraise the Liberals? Because they do so because of hardworking Canadians. We do so because of hardworking Canadians who feel that the Conservative Party reflects their views. We do so because we have a leader who's committed to Canadians and average Canadians and not selling access as our friends across the way have been doing since the beginning of their time in office. But let's go back to what this bill is trying to do. It's trying to legitimize what the Liberals have been doing. Rather than simply stopping cash for access, they'd rather put in new rules just to legitimize what they're doing. But they didn't have to, Mr. Speaker. They already have rules in place in their mandate letters and in the Open and Accountable Government document. I want to quote from the Minister of Democratic Institutions mandate letter, but the words are reflected in all the mandate letters of the Minister. The Prime Minister wrote to his Minister of Democratic Institutions, "You must uphold the highest standards of honesty and impartiality, and both the performance of your official duties and the arrangement of your private affairs should bear the closest public scrutiny. This is an obligation that is not fully discharged simply by acting within the law." The Prime Minister's own letter to his ministers clearly dictates that simply following the letter of the law wasn't enough. They had to appear to be fully above board. And Mr. Speaker, this was not happening with the Liberals' cash for access fundraisers. So they bring in this piece of legislation to try to legitimize it. The Liberal government introduced its Open and Accountable Government document with great fanfare. This would be the roadmap for a new era of transparency for these Liberals. And the opening clearly states, open and accountable government sets out the core principles regarding the roles and responsibilities of ministers in Canada's system of responsible parliamentary government. So what are some of those requirements? What are some of those issues that ministers and parliamentary secretaries ought to follow? In Annex B, Fundraising and Dealing with Lobbyists, Best Practices for Ministers and Parliamentary Secretaries, it states, ministers and parliamentary secretaries must avoid conflict of interest, the appearance of conflict of interest and situations that have potential to involve conflicts of interest. Well, Mr. Speaker, the best practices that the Prime Minister lays out were not followed by his Liberals, were not followed by his ministers, who felt the need to raise $1,500 from those donors who could have direct dealings with not only the government as a whole, but also with their individual departments. Under general principles, Open and Transparent Government Annex D writes, ministers and parliamentary secretaries must ensure that political fundraising activities or considerations do not affect or appear to affect the exercise of their official duties or the access of individuals or organizations to government. It's not only following the letter of the law, Mr. Speaker, it's the appearance. It's ensuring that all actions are above board, are able to have the closest degree of scrutiny to ensure that those who serve as ministers of the Crown, those who serve our country in high office, are not tainted by even the appearance of conflict of interest. I'm reminded of a former minister in our Harper Conservative government who, once it became aware that there was a potential that those who lobbied and who worked with her department could be attending a fundraiser hosted by her riding association, that event was cancelled. The event was cancelled and all funds raised were immediately returned. But yet, flash forward to this government, not only is that money not being returned, but the Liberals are doubling down on these events, and they have introduced Bill C-50 to do so. Now, this bill has had great fanfare from pretty much only the Liberal Party. In testimony before committee, almost every witness was very lukewarm in their excitement about this piece of legislation. Was very lukewarm in the response of an underwhelming bill brought forward. And it could be, Mr. Speaker, because this bill really doesn't do much at all, Mr. Speaker. And in fact, the media knows this. And despite advertising these events, the way the media is actually treated at the events is far from ideal. In fact, let me read from a Hill Times article from June 21st, 2017. A Hill journalist is calling into question the Liberal Party's promise to make its fundraising events more open and transparent after party staff restricted media access at a June 19 Ottawa event for the party's top donors. So sure, the media can know about the events. Heck, they can even show up as long as they stay in the corner and not talk to anyone. The report goes on to state, reporters were ushered into one room for an RCMP sweep prior to the speeches. They were told they were not allowed to mingle, but could talk to guests registering and entering the event in the foyer of the museum. And you know, Mr. Speaker, even a Liberal Party candidate expressed concern with how the Liberals were treating journalists. Alan Thompson, a journalism professor at Carleton University, who ran for the Liberals in the riding of Huron-Bruce, Ontario during 2015 and attended Monday's event, said in an interview afterward that he had sympathy for the reporters who weren't allowed to mingle, especially because of his background as a former Hill reporter with the Toronto Star. Mr. Speaker, it's one thing to try to legitimize cash for access, but then to blatantly use this as a ploy to keep the media away, to use it as a way in which to ensure that this actually isn't opening transparency up at all. Unlike our former Conservative government, who on taking office in 2006 introduced Bill C-2, the strongest measures of accountability and transparency in our country, a bill that banned corporate donations, a bill that banned union donations, and a bill that put hard caps on the amount of money that could be donated to political parties. Unfortunately, the good work that was begun by the Conservative Party is now being used by these Liberals to initiate and to continue their cash for access events. Now, of course, Mr. Speaker, there are certain exceptions and exemptions to this bill. One such exemption is what I like to call the Laurier Club loophole. So yes, Mr. Speaker, donor appreciation events are included under this legislation, except for when they occur at a party convention. So, Mr. Speaker, a perfect example of this is a Liberal Party convention happening later this year. Liberal Party's own website boasts about the benefits of being a Laurier Club member, which includes invitations to Laurier Club events across the country, hearing from leading voices on our Liberal team, and the opportunity to meet a strong network of business and community leaders who share your commitment to Liberal values. The Liberal Party is selling access through their Laurier Club. And in fact, just earlier this week, the Chief of Staff to the Minister of National Defence sent a tweet that said, "If there was a time to join the Laurier Club, now is the time." Of course, referring in advance to the Laurier Club event that would be held at the Liberal Convention later this year. It is cash for access, simply under another way of doing it. Now, Mr. Speaker, I do find it interesting that when this legislation was tabled, we heard from certain witnesses in committee, and one of those witnesses was Canada's acting Chief Electoral Officer. And it was interesting because the acting Chief Electoral Officer had a number of suggested amendments to this piece of legislation. Now, why should the Chief Electoral Officer have to encourage a committee to introduce amendments? Could it be, Mr. Speaker, that this Liberal government didn't actually consult the Chief Electoral Officer before introducing this piece of legislation and instead had to rely on the committee to review and take into account some of his recommendations? Now, Mr. Speaker, let's talk a little bit about penalties in this Act. Section 500 of the Act is amended by adding the following after subsection 1. Punishment, strict liability offences. Every person who is guilty of an offence under Section 497.01 is liable on summary conviction to a fine of not more than $1,000. Well, that's one aspect of it, Mr. Speaker, but the other aspect is found in Section 384.4, which refers to the returning of contributions. So I find it interesting, Mr. Speaker, with these Liberals, that if, under this situation, an event is held which doesn't comply with the new rules they're putting into place, the money has to be repaid. But what about an all-expense-paid trip to the Aga Khan's private island? What about a trip in which the Ethics Commissioner found that the Prime Minister had violated the ethics laws on 4 separate occasions? What about that situation, Mr. Speaker? Well, no. These Liberals feel there's no need to repay money in that situation. There's no need for the Prime Minister to pay back $200,000+ that was expensed to Canadian taxpayers for an illegal and ethically challenged trip that the Prime Minister himself took. No, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister doesn't feel the need to pay that back because what's good for the goose is not good for the gander, Mr. Speaker, and it's simply unacceptable, this behaviour by an elected member of this House, let alone the Prime Minister of this country. Mr. Speaker, this bill is clear what it intends to do. It intends to do nothing more than to legitimize the cash for access schemes of the Liberal Party of Canada. Mr. Speaker, old habits die hard, and with these Liberals, it's the same old Liberal Party. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Democratic Institutions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the colleague across the way for his work, not only today on this, but his hard work on PROC, where we get to work together very productively often. The member opined as to whether or not the government had engaged with or consulted with the acting Chief Electoral Officer, and I'd like to just read a quote that the acting CEO, shared with PROC and with us when we did in fact consult with them. And he wrote, "There is an important exception for party conventions, including leadership conventions. The convention itself is exempted, but if there's a fundraiser within the convention that meets all the conditions, then it is caught by the new rules. And he writes, again, this reflects a concern to achieve a proper balance, and I think it is wise. So, of course, everyone who attends the convention in the first place will pay a fee, and then that will be recorded because that's a political contribution. That is why he believes the correct balance has been struck by exempting events within the convention. I wonder if the member would care to characterize the weight or validity of the acting CEO's remark in this regard.
The honourable member for Perth Wellington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of Democratic Institutions for his question. In almost any piece of legislation, there will be exemptions and exceptions, and important exemptions and exceptions under the law. But just because there are exceptions and exemptions does not mean it is open season for the Liberal Party to exploit those exemptions and exceptions. And that is exactly what is being done by this Liberal Party. They are using every loophole, every exemption, every exception in the book to continue with their cash for access exercises. They're using their pay-for-to-play fundraising to sell access to senior members with the only caveat, don't worry, we'll report it. Well, it's already being reported, Mr. Speaker. Any donation, any contribution over $200 is reported. That information is already there. But the Liberal Party is using this platform, is using this piece of legislation to legitimize what they are doing when they are selling access to their senior ministers. Mr. Speaker, it's wrong, and Canadians know it's wrong.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member from Perth Wellington for his speech about Bill C-50, a bill, as he described, rose because of the problem around the Liberal cash for access fundraisers. And I just wondered if he could comment on what the average Canadian might want this government to do to fix this problem. Would, if you went and asked a reasonable person on the street, would you feel a whole lot better about these things if you'd been invited? Would you feel a whole lot better if you found out a month from now who was there rather than a year from now? These people can't afford $1,500 to get this access. Or should this government had actually made it illegal to have cash for access fundraisers? I just wondered if he could elaborate on that.
For Perth Wellington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my colleague, the honourable member for South Okanagan's West Kootenay, for the question. And he's right. What does the average Canadian think about the practices of this Liberal government? Most Canadians cannot afford a $1,500 donation to the Liberal Party, let alone even a $200 donation. There should not be any preferential access to the decision makers because of how much they donate to the Liberal Party. And in fact, as I mentioned earlier, the open and transparent government document that this Liberal Party proclaimed with great fanfare clearly prohibits any preferential access, but yet they've ignored it. They've ignored it. The average Canadian wants to see better from their decision makers. The average Canadian wants to know that their members of Parliament, that their ministers of the Crown are not being unduly influenced by large donations to the Liberal Party of Canada simply for access to their ministers to bend their ears. Most Canadians can't afford that opportunity, and neither should the wealthy few.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Glengarry, Prescott Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for his speech, and I appreciate that he enjoys comparing the Liberal record versus the Conservative record. I really do appreciate that, and I appreciate the Conservative Party's newfound vision to ask for and respect taxpayers' dollars and ask to pay it back, because I recall a few years ago when the Conservatives they seem to be on fishing trips often, and the former National Defence Minister, Peter MacKay, had took a helicopter illegally, and I don't recall him signing a cheque to the Government of Canada, but that's besides the fact. There's one thing that the Liberals don't do, and that's we don't appoint senators to help gratify our party coffers, and I just want to read one quote. It soon became clear that Stephen Harper had not chosen Mike Duffy merely to speechify in the Red Chamber. He was known to go across the country on taxpayers' dime and fundraise for the Conservative Party. No senators currently are doing any fundraising in the chamber for the Liberal Party. I'm not sure it's quite the same thing for the Conservatives. But one thing I want to ask him, he mentioned C2 and the Federal Accountability Act. We're taking that one step further, and we're asking party leaders and those who are attaining the nomination to immediately publish the list of the names of those who attended the fundraiser. And to this date, the Conservative Party has chosen not to do that. We have proactively done this yet again, and the Conservative Party refuses to do that unless it becomes law. So just wondering, where's the transparency in the Conservative Party?
The honourable member for Perth Wellington.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The member wants to talk about appointments. Let me talk about appointments. Let me talk about Madeleine Meilleur. I had the great pleasure of sitting on the Official Languages Committee when Madeleine Meilleur was appointed as Official Languages Commissioner for Canada. A woman who paid $5,000 in donations to the Liberal Party. A member, an individual who directly contributed to the Prime Minister's own leadership campaign. A person who only weeks before she was officially nominated was a card-carrying member of the Liberal Party of Canada. A person who was appointed who was told that she was being appointed before the official opposition and the third party were even consulted. The nomination process that this Liberal government undertook for nominating an officer of this place, nominating a partisan Liberal donor, an individual who just a year prior was a sitting Liberal cabinet minister. That's the type of appointments we're seeing from this Liberal Party. This is a type of unfair appointments and rewards for being a long-time Liberal donor and a long-time Liberal. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I have time for one more question and response. L'honorable député Louis Saint-Laurent.
The honourable member for Louis Saint-Laurent. Mr. Speaker, I find it very daring of the Liberals to talk about partisan appointments. Now, this lady was not able to be appointed senator, so she wanted a consolation prize, and that was to be language commissioner. Mr. Speaker, when my colleague was speaking, he talked about the sponsorship scandal. And with respect to the Liberal sponsorship scandal 10 years ago, you think it might not crop up again with the legal sale of cannabis, where you see that there are dozens of Liberals who seem to be well set up just about everywhere.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président, et je voudrais...
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague, the honourable member for Louis Saint-Laurent, for his excellent question. Yes, I have a great many concerns about the ideas of the Liberal Party with respect to marijuana.
Going with their marijuana proposals. And I think the member from Louis Saint-Laurent is absolutely right. Is this going to be another proposal, another way in which Liberal Party members, Liberal Party past ministers are getting rich off of the legalization of marijuana? I think it's a worthy question, and I think they owe Canadians a response on that.
Questions and comments? Yes, we have time, I guess. 30 seconds. Questions and comments? Okay. Let's go ahead then. Resuming debate. Reprise de débat. Is the House ready for the question? Yes? La question est la suivante.
The question is as follows. Ms. Gould, seconded by Mr. Bryson, moves that Bill C-50, an act to amend the Canada Elections Act, political financing, be now read a third time and do pass.
Adopt the motion. Yes. All those in favor of the motion will please say yea. Yay. All those opposed will please say nay. In my opinion, the yeas have it. Pursuant to Standing Order 45, the Recorded Division stands deferred until Monday, February 12th, 2018, at the ordinary hour of daily adjournment. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, I think that you would seek it, you would likely find unanimous consent for the following: that notwithstanding any standing order or usual practice of the House, that the Recorded Division on third reading of Bill C-50, an act to amend the Canada Elections Act, be further deferred until the expiry of the time provided for oral questions on Tuesday, February the 13th, 2018.
Does the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader have the unanimous consent of the House to propose this motion? Yes? The House has heard the terms of the motion. Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion? Yes? Agreed? Agreed and so ordered. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
I suspect, Mr. Speaker, you'd likely find it unanimous support to have it be called at 1:30 so we could begin private members' hour at this time.
Is it the wish of the House to see the clock at 1:30 p.m.? Yes? Agreed? Agreed and so ordered. The House will now proceed to the consideration of private members' business as listed on today's order paper. Orders of the day.
Orders of the day, private members' business. Resuming debate at second reading of Bill C-371, Prevention of Radicalization Through Foreign Funding Act, standing in the name of Mr. Clement.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Glengarry Prescott Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to take part in this debate. As we go through Bill C-371, I approve of the objective and the ideas that inspired it. Stopping the funding that helps terrorism is one of the key concerns of the government. This bill, C-371, would help to prevent the circulation in Canada of foreign financing that would aid in radicalization. In the last debate we had, members observed that this bill contains redundancies that conflict with various mechanisms already in place in Canada. The bill also contains shortcomings that would be difficult to overcome. For example, this bill would imperil certain charitable and legitimate organizations. This would prevent religious institutions, cultural and educational groups to accept money coming from a group that was affiliated with one on the list. This would be senior officials, family, partners. This would criminalize the accepting of donations coming from certain individuals, but there is no list of individuals who cannot make donations. So charitable organizations will have to be looked into in a thorough way and may, if they omit to provide certain facts, they could be sanctioned. The legislation is excessively complex or provides for things that are excessively complex. And the government would not be able to have everyone comply with all the interdictions in the legislation because of their indefinite nature. Certain groups do not figure on the list. The bill is also incompatible with the government's policy with respect to radicalization that leads to violence. The fact is that the objective in the bill is already covered by present legislation and practices. The government has already taken concrete, effective measures to counter terrorism and to counter radicalization that leads to violence in Canada. We have a robust array of measures that will help us to monitor and counter the risks of radicalization and terrorism. This includes a prohibition from joining certain groups that are listed. Other entities that are on this list are banks and other groups that can freeze the assets of certain of these groups. It also prohibits any group that provides assistance to terrorist groups through sympathizers in Canada. The law on the recycling of the product of crime has led to a new center, and FINTRAC looks at financing and looks at the financial activities of groups that may be assisting terrorism. Through FINTRAC, one has to disclose all activities, and we can also look into the activities of charitable groups which may be linked to terrorist groups. We also look at foreign countries that support terrorism. The legislation on aid for victims of terrorism is also an important one. Now, as we see in C-371, efforts to counter terrorism must include charitable organizations. Once again, Mr. Speaker, we already have effective mechanisms to deal with this. The CRA is already monitoring charitable organizations to make sure that they're working exclusively with a charitable purpose in mind. Now, present rules make it such that any charitable organizations that use their finances to support terrorism or radicalization leading to violence or the propagation of hate would lose their standing as a charitable organization and would have their registration as such repealed. We also have what we need in order to fight religious persecution and other inhumane acts. Now, we also have legislation on the victims of corrupt foreign leaders, and this helps us to counter grave violations of human rights. Mr. Speaker, there are already very important measures in place that aim to counter those things that we see in Bill C-371. Therefore, despite its goodwill, it is impossible for us to support this bill. It's clear that a fight against terrorism and extremism is something we all share, and this is why the government started an organization to help fight against the radicalization of young Canadians. In 2016, the government put $35 million into a center to counter radicalization. This is making all the difference in the world. People are getting assistance in order to fight radicalization effectively, radicalization that leads to violence, and this assistance often helps to get various law enforcement groups together with community groups. And prevention is something that is important for our security services and our intelligence services, and this would include surveillance, interception of threats, the repeal of a passport, and leveling criminal accusations or criminal charges where there is enough evidence. This helps us to increase the efficacy of our intelligence and security framework. We have the greatest terrorism prevention and radicalization prevention tools that Canada has ever had, and this is a way that we can fight violence, extremism, radicalization, and also helps us to bring guilty parties to justice. I'm sorry that I can't support this bill, but I'm looking forward to working with the member for Parry Sound Muskoka. I'd like to work with the honourable member in order to make Canada a safer place and in order to fight all forms of extremism and violence. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Reprise de débat.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Charlevoix, Pont-Saint-Charles. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech, but I have to tell him something. At the present time, we're now looking at Bill C-59, and there are certain shortcomings in it, and my colleague, the honourable member for Parry Sound Muskoka, with C-371 is there to deal with this shortcoming. So I'm standing and speaking in the House to support my colleague who has brought forward what I consider an essential tool to fighting terrorism. It is something that would allow us to establish a list of groups and persons who pose a threat because either they themselves are capable of terrorism or can be shown to be, or they are encouraging others to be. Also those who provide financing for groups that support radicalization. It would allow us to prevent a person, an entity, or a foreigner who is abetting or encouraging terrorism by financing through a third party. The bill is very important because almost every day the Liberals show that they do not understand the very grave nature of the threat. All Canadians all over the country heard the Prime Minister say, and I quote, "Jihadists can be a way that we can deal, people who come back from these countries can be a very important, can help the country in a very important way." I find this irresponsible. Let's look at the people who've come back to Canada after having been trained as terrorists. These terrorists have committed inconceivable acts of violence. They have killed homosexuals, they've raped women, they have killed Christians, Jews, and Yazidis and other groups. These people, they think, can not only become part of society again, but can contribute to society. Perhaps they can contribute to terrorism. Is the Prime Minister aware of the very real danger that these people represent? Is the Prime Minister watching the news about the terrorist attacks in other countries? The Prime Minister also signed a paper allowing a terrorist to be paid a great deal of money. This bill, C-371, is important because we know that there are very few charges laid against people who have provided either material or moral encouragement to terrorists. We learned that between 2009 and 2013, the FINTRAC found over 100 cases of terrorist encouragement and aiding, yet no charges have been made. Since then, this list has gotten longer. Over the past decade, people have been convicted for having to do or for envisaging attacks. There are Canadians who have joined terrorist groups who are hostile to Canada and its allies. A great many Canadians have returned after having fought with fundamentalists. They've come back with their terrorist training and they represent a risk to Canada. But there have been very few charges, prosecutions, or convictions of people who have provided material help to the jihadist cause. Mr. Speaker, there was the conviction in 2010 of a Mr. Budarai who was accused of having collected money for the Tamil Liberation Army. And this was a group supporting terrorist groups since the Tamil Tigers, Hezbollah, and other groups. The Imam of Calgary and other witnesses told the Senate Standing Committee on Security and National Defense that the danger of jihadist extremism was very real in schools in Canada. Now, Mr. Speaker, it was an imam who mentioned this and who made this particular statement about the danger. And I would also quote, money is transferred in various ways. Some of these ways are secret. Sometimes the money gets to them through institutions. There are 2 organizations in Canada. These are organizations that are American organizations, but which are active in Canada. One is called the Al-Maghreb Institution and also the Al-Qudar organization. These 2 organizations work in universities, not in mosques. They organize symposiums and groups. And Mr. Speaker, this is a statement made by the Imam in Calgary to the Senate committee. Also, Mr. Shaina Siddiqui of the Islamic Social Services Association, who appeared before this same committee in 2015, and he said, and I quote, I think that we were offered $3 million by a certain organization. We refused it. It was a Canadian organization, but we said we didn't need money. We didn't need any money from foreign parties. We were offered money by a foreign group for our mosque, and we refused it. We refused it not because it wasn't legal, but we knew that we wanted this to stop, any influence by these groups. We did it for the good of our own community. And Mr. Siddiqui of Islamic Social Services said, no, I don't want your money because it came from Libya, $3 million, and these people knew that it was money that was coming through a back door, but it was for undue purposes. Richard Fadden, and I'm sure you'll remember Richard Fadden. He was an advisor to Prime Minister Harper, confirmed, and was a former director of the of CSIS. Talked about the financing of terrorism through religious and quasi-religious groups. And in this bill, we see another way that it could be a tool in dealing with this kind of financing. There is C-59, a 40-page bill, yes, but since the very beginning of hearing witnesses, we saw that there was a flaw in the bill. And I said to my colleagues, this bill, C-371, will make good the shortcomings in C-59. So I think this bill is a very good one, and I think it's highly relevant, and it should be voted for. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Edmonton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak to Bill C-371, the Prevention of Radicalization Through Foreign Funding Act, introduced by my colleague from Parry Sound, Muskoka. Organized criminal and terrorist networks are constantly evolving to find new ways to finance their crimes. New opportunities for criminal networks to exploit things like funding chains and programs offered through non-government organizations are constantly surfacing, and it's our job as legislatures to not only recognize this pattern, but to shut them down. Today I'd like to talk about some of the gaps in our current law and what it means for Canadians and why I think this bill is a step in the right direction. There's numerous scenarios that currently allow terrorist organizations to infiltrate Canadian networks. These are often wealthy foreign influencers who funnel funds from their propaganda machines into Canadian charities and institutions. Iman Syed Soharwari told the Senate Committee on National Security that this problem has been largely ignored, stating, the money comes in different ways, in secret ways, through institutions. There's organizations in Canada. Basically, they're U.S. organizations that are operating in Canada. One is called the Al-Maghreb Institute. The other is the Al-Qudar Institute. Both work in universities, not in mosques. They give lectures, both organize seminars. They are the ones who brainwash our young kids in these lectures. Now, these are not amateur actors, Mr. Speaker. They know where to find impressionable kids and how to pull them in using complex programs for recruitment through Canadian institutions like those based in education and faith. Richard Fadden, National Security Advisor to our XPM and former director of CSIS, explained that a major difficulty for managing this crisis in oversight is that money is coming from individuals and NGOs and not just foreign governments, which makes it more difficult to track. We know that between 2009 and 2014, Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Centre of Canada identified 683 terrorist financing incidences, and yet we haven't prosecuted any of these. Listed entities noted as operating are Tamil Tigers, Hamas, and Hezbollah. Now, just recently, my colleague from across the Liberal side stated that there is no real need for improvement right now, but there hasn't been a single charge of these 683 incidences of money coming into terrorist organizations. It's clear the government does not take this issue seriously. Now, what happens when the funding network goes unchallenged or unchecked, and what it means for radicalization? Well, groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, and Daesh have developed complex campaigns that seek out gullible audiences around the world. Any funding that these organizations get, whether through criminal activity or collusion with foreign governments, goes toward growing their network, enhancing their capabilities, and spreading their message to indoctrinate people beyond the borders. Now, let's be clear here. Canada has been directly threatened by terrorist groups. Calls to action from these groups for domestic fighters have been made. These groups have a vested interest in using the funds they make and collect abroad for international recruitment because their existence goes as far as their message will carry it. Daesh alone has a participation over 100 Canadians so far that we know of. And with the advancement of digital communication and the increasing use of the internet, that number will continue to grow. A National Post story cited in the Senate committee report states that it takes about 30 seconds to create a Twitter account and connect to somebody in Syria, and then Facebook's algorithm suggests similar sites and friends with the same interests. These connections are used to establish contacts, create shell organizations, and nurture relationships with newly radicalized groups. Because this funding is being funneled into existing local institutions, they can recruit en masse, making a much more lucrative investment for time and resources. This bill seeks to apply a framework that stops this from happening. By setting out a schedule of foreign states and by extension, for individuals and entities that suppress religious freedom, imposes punishments for religious beliefs, or have engaged in or facilitated activities that promote radicalization. As an added protection, there's a built-in review and appeal process that ensures accountability and transparency throughout the process of assessment. This spurs a further need with regard to foreign funding, and especially why we aren't doing more to enhance transparency and accountability in funding that Canada looks after and put forward incoming and outgoing funds from Canada. Most glaring example right now was the Liberals' decision to return funding to the United Nations Relief Works Agency, an organization that is known to be infiltrated and used by Hamas. UNRWA, while operating as a non-government organization, has provided facilities directly to terrorist organizations that commit crimes against children, against women, and against populations as a whole. They even allow Hamas to build tunnels underneath schools for launching rockets at Israel. I have to ask, why is this right? Why are Canadian taxpayers funding an organization that is contributing to the violence against innocent people? Now let's talk about the main source of the illicit funding coming into Canada and across the world, Saudi Arabia. From a Robert Fife article on the Saudis, while reporting on the Task Force report on terrorist financing by the Council on Foreign Relations, which included former White House counterterrorist czar Richard Clarke and David Cohen, the CIA's former director of operations. They stated Saudi Arabia is funding radical Islamic extremism in Canada, where the Saudis have contributed millions of dollars to a mysterious center in Toronto, a U.S. panel on terrorist financing is told. Saudi Arabia funds the global propagation of Wahhabism, a brand of Islam, in some instances, that supports militancy by encouraging divisiveness and violent acts against Muslims and non-Muslims, the report said. The massive spending is helping to create the next generation of terrorists and therefore constitutes a paramount strategic threat to the United States and other neighboring countries. The task force said Saudi Arabia has spent hundreds of millions of dollars around the world, including in Canada. It cites an official Saudi report that stated the Saudis donated millions in Canada, including to the Salahuddin Center, which runs a mosque and a private elementary school where the Qadar family and other radicals linked to Al-Qaeda belonged, and where the organization's website preaches against Jews and Christians. Now here's a delightful statement from that website, which is helped fund by the Saudis. Why do we hate the Jews? We hate them for the sake of our Lord. We hate them for the sake of Allah because they slandered Allah and they killed and slandered his prophets. So here we have Saudi funding coming into Canada promoting hate. I want to chat about the Saudis additionally for a moment. This is the country that attacks in Yemen have led to over 4,000 civilian casualties, hitting homes, hospitals, and schools, as well as civilian factories, warehouses, and other protected sites. Their forces have admitted using banned cluster munitions. Their laws allow for floggings, stonings, executions, and brutal jail time for supporting demonstrations or for merely harming the reputation of the kingdom. Women must obtain permission from a male guardian to marry, divorce, travel, get a job, or have elective surgery or any other healthcare treatment. So here we have the Saudi groups poisoning minds in Canada and around the world, and our responses for Liberal government to happily bring in blood oil into the east coast of Canada at the same time it shuns Alberta oil by killing off Energy East. We have over 122,000 oil workers without jobs in Alberta since the price of the oil collapse, and Alberta's unemployment sits at a 22-year high, and yet here we are knocking on Saudi Arabia's door for access to resource we have plenty of at home. Now, why are we pouring funds into countries that act in direct violations of rights we strive to uphold, that commit violence and discriminatory practices against women, minority rights, the LGBTQ community, and all demographic groups that this government claims to support? I suppose saying that we're promoting human rights is easier than actually promoting them, and yet here we are. Now, we need to preserve the integrity of our local institutions, our churches, our mosques, our schools, and ensure that they and the people that rely on them are protected, and that we cut off this funding head. We know what's happening, we know who's doing it, but we aren't doing anything to stop it. This bill is an essential way for governments to ensure that radicalist groups aren't able to use local and domestic institutions as a means of growing their network and committing atrocities around the world. We need to ensure accountability and fiscal transparency in the foreign funding coming into Canadian schools and places of worship. I thank my honourable colleague for bringing this private member's bill forward, and I will proudly support it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate. Reprise de débat. Is the House ready for the question? Yes? The question is as follows. Mr. Clement, seconded by Mr. Anderson, moved that Bill C-371, an act respecting the prevention of radicalization through foreign funding and making related amendments to the Income Tax Act, be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security.
Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt this motion? All those in favor of the motion will please say yea. All those opposed will please say nay.
No.
In my opinion, the nays have it. Pursuant to Standing Order 93, the Recorded Division stands deferred until Wednesday, February 14th, 2017, immediately before the time provided for private members' business. It being 1:34 p.m., the House stands adjourned until next Monday at 11 a.m. pursuant to Standing Order 24-1.